Chapter 1: The Beginning of the End. The collector hurtled through the unending darkness of deep space at blinding speeds, pulverizing any stray asteroid or debris in its way into dust. It was encased in a ball of durable organic hyperalloy more capable than any dreadnought-class ship hull in the entire sector. Like a planetoid bowling ball of segmented, ashen white, chitinous carapace, it traveled as a relativistic phantom of blurred white that promised nothing but death and destruction. The tinkering races that needed life support systems to brave the void of space and firearms to compensate for their weak limbs and all manner of trinkets to cover for their biological weaknesses might have conquered the ecosystems of their home planets and perhaps, as their individualistic, selfish tendencies were wont to do, even exploited them to destruction. But the collector symbolized a side of nature that could never be tamed. It was pure evolutionary progress honed to a razor edge sharper than that belonging to any plasmoid blade known in the galaxy. For the collectors were the premier heralds of the collective, a hive mind species that consumed all life, adapting their biological structures into its own to produce hyper-efficient, hyper-deadly organisms without equal throughout the stars, painting the vast, dark canvas of space with the blood and tears of billions. And for all the complexities involved in the so very many tools the tinkering species used, the collective's methods were rather simple. The collective, once consuming an interstellar species, would find more targets in their memories. It would track these targets, finding any weaknesses it could in the memories it absorbed, and over several years tinkering with the best genetic material possible, morph a collector, an almost indestructible, unstoppable force of raw biological power, and send it onwards to harvest to the helpless civilization. It was nothing short of ironic that the greatest marvel of the tinkering species would lead to their downfall. With the advent of warp-link technology that could generate wormholes that connected the farthest ends of the galaxy together, interstellar commerce and interaction became commonplace, but with it came the rise of the collective. Once, the collective was an isolated species that had extended its tendrils only across its home solar system over the course of millennia. Over a century ago, the very first strange tinkering ships warped into the collective's then unknown home system. The collective consumed these adventuresome stragglers, and with their knowledge, accessed the warp gates they left behind. As it consumed more and more tinkering species, the collective eventually devised its own way of generating warp gates, and soon enough it used the very same interconnected routes of gates meant for trade and peace to wage war and consumption. To any spacefaring onlooker, the collector would have raised immediate alarm. Any ship witnessing the collector's bald figure speeding through the starry void would have alerted every single nearby civilization it could. There were very few times a collector fell in battle, and it had always been through the united effort of several races, for no single civilization could best a collector with its many evolutionary adaptations tailor-made against the likes of weakling tinkerers. But unlike the missions granted to its past brethren, this collector knew not what it would face. A warp gate had opened strangely close to the collective's home solar system. The collective solar system had long since been closed to space travel, deemed far too dangerous to ever traverse, and so this wormhole's appearance so close to the collective home world was all too strange. Perhaps an attack. Perhaps an accident. But the collective did not like uncertainties. It thrived on knowledge, and so it sent a collector to this wormhole to face any potential threat on the other end. The collector felt pride in being able to serve the collective. Though it retained a mental independence crucial in allowing it to adapt to the high-intensity, high-uncertainty challenges of battle, it still had an undying loyalty to the collective. Its purpose was to defend the collective at all costs and destroy and consume all its foes, bringing back their genetic material as spoils of war. Nothing less, nothing more. It was an extension of the collective, utilizing only the best parts of free will the tinkering species had evolved while trimming the excess, the rebellious, unproductive tendencies that so often led to infighting. This was the mindset the collector held as it neared the wormhole, a pulsating mass of blinding light almost as large as a small planet. Waves of undulating gravity and space wreathed its horizon, drawing in the collector as it neared. When the collector touched the horizon, it felt itself drawing into the wormhole, its body warping every this way and that as the realities of space and time became fluid. Its body, hardened by countless evolutions and perfected by the collective, could survive the rigors of warp travel, and soon enough it passed through without issue. It was an interesting process, warp travel was. The feeling of having every atom of its existence warped at the seams of spatial and temporal limitation managed to make the collector feel nausea, a feeling that no weapon in the galaxy, biological or munitions-based, was capable of. At the other end, the collector found itself floating above a vibrant planet. It did not take utilizing the collector's massive array of senses to know that this was a planet full of life. Even from high orbit, it could see that the planet, blue and green, had countless life signatures worth consuming. 7 rings, each a different shade of light, circled the verdant planet, glowing with a strange yet alluring intensity that promised life. Alarmingly, the warp gate behind the collector closed away, leaving it stranded. It did not panic, however, for that was not part of its evolutionary development. It merely recalibrated its goals. It did not have the capacity to open a warp gate, the collective alone had the combined psionic power for that, so it would instead savage this planet to accumulate enough biomass for another burst of deep space travel to the nearest warp gate. Where exactly that gate was, the collector could not ascertain. It looked into system of memories embedded, built upon by collector after collector that came before it, to map out a path, but this star system was entirely foreign, this planet utterly unknown. Odd. All warp gates had to be built within a certain degree of proximity to each other, each gate forming a supportive node in a much greater system. Any warp gate that existed far beyond the reach of the greater whole would not maintain itself. The collector emitted a psionic pulse, mentally attempting to establish connection with the collective. For so long as any member of its kind, no matter whether it was a lowly drone or another collector, was within distance of it, it could essentially pinball and amplify this mental message and reach the collective. The effective range of the collective psionic communication network spanned many light years and crossed dozens of warp gates. And yet, though the collector could feel the pulse reaching out, it could not find a signal returning to it. The possibility existed that the collector was stranded far, far from home, but that did not induce panic within it, nor was it biologically capable of feeling such an inefficient emotion to a high degree. The greatest likelihood existed that some life form on this world had created the aberrant warp gate. All the collector had to do then was to consume all life on this planet and, through extracted memories, find a method back to the collective. The collector unfurled out of its bald cocoon state. Suited for hyperspace travel as the compact form was, it was not suited for combat. Its appearance could now best be described as bestial, appearing like an armored, infinitely more monstrous kind of crocodile. It looked like something crocodiles would worship as a god. It was quadrupedal, supporting its enormous, 6,000-plus ton weight on skyscraper-like legs muscled with the densest, most efficient ultrafibers and sheathed in ashen carapace impervious to even the strongest of blasters. Flexible spikes emerged across its back and through seams in its armor, acting as tools of war that could scythe through entire cities. Its neck, long but thickly muscled, stretched forwards eagerly, its carapace helmeted head opening a set of monstrous jaws in expectant hunger. Its multiple tails, prehensile and dexterous like arms, flitted about it, morphing between acid spitters, blades, bulbous electromagnetic pulse emitters, and any other variant of destructive weapon it required for assimilation. With a grunt of exertion unheard in the soundless void of space, the collector sprouted enormous wings bat-like in structure but dotted with pulsating tubules which emitted bursts of raw, blue plasmoid energy like jet engines, surging it towards the planet. But as the collector neared, there came forth a challenger unlike any it had ever known. A towering being of brilliant light. 12 feathered, energy-wreathed wings sprouted from its back, fluttering gently to propel it forwards. It was a good deal smaller than the collector, but still as large as any capital-class ship. It was bipedal. Humanoid and armored in platinum white with a blazing helmet of sterling silver that shone ever the more brighter in the contrasting dark of space. The collector reached into the psionic link it had with the collective to access the shared memory database of tinkering species wired into its brain. However, the humanoid structure's armor did not match any ship covering that the collector held in its memory bank. Especially not any belonging to the human race, one of the 3 tinkering species that comprised the united front against the collective. An entirely new species, perhaps? Or perhaps a strange new device that the other races had devised in order to try and kill the collective? It was not unheard of. One collector had even fallen to a similar humanoid machine titan of war created by the vast alliance that comprised the United Front. Either way, the collector had to destroy it, whether for defense or consumption it did not matter. It stood in the way of this planet. "Halt!" shouted the being. Its voice resonated throughout even the soundless expanse of space, powered by a strange phenomenon that the collector did not understand. "I am Solarian, the High King of the Gods, defender of the 7 realms, Lord of Etheria, keeper of the eternal light. On the authority vested unto me, I command you to stay your advance, monster." The collector did not recognize the being's language and continued forwards, its tails armed with acid spitters, its jaws bared, and its claws extended. "So be it," said the being. It materialized a blade almost as large as itself from light it generated out of nowhere. Solid light constructs were a phenomenon. that the collector had witnessed before in its memory bank, but this was entirely different. It could not sense any of the regular energy signatures that accommodated the construction of such weapons. To think that the prophesied end was no Undeath, no star stone even, but a beast from the void itself. The being held the sword above its head. It flashed with all the brilliance of a sun, its white-hot blade generating a radiance that drove the cold of space away. "Come, foul creature of the stars!" shouted the being. "You will be reduced to ashes just as the countless demons and monsters I have slain before you." The collector did not recognize the being's language, but aggression was an universal indicator. It surged forwards, spitting acid and electricity as it barreled towards the strange organism or ship. The battle was fierce and on a scale the collector had never believed possible. It lasted for an entire day and night cycle, the humanoid being restoring its acid-ridden, electricity-burned, claw-gouged flesh seemingly out of nowhere and the collector regenerating its own flesh with its advanced genetic traits. Organic hyperalloy claws the size of megastructures clashed with a heavenly sword of light. Streams of acid and blasts of condensed electric energy were countered with beams of burning, fiery radiance. But eventually, there was a winner in sight. The collector. It was missing 2 limbs, its tail shaved off, its body littered with scorch marks and cuts that refused to heal, but the being was in an even worse state. It floated weakly with 1 remaining wing out of 12. Its armor had melted, burnt, cracked, or sheared, leaving a bloody, beaten humanoid figure heaving with exhaustion underneath. The being did not heal anymore, nor did it generate scorching blasts of light. It had run out of whatever energy was fueling it, the aura of radiance dimming down all about it as its power escaped it, dooming it to death. The only thing that remained pristine was its blade, but the collector cared little of any tinkerer's construct. The collector felt excitement instead for the flesh of this being, for instead of being some kind of mechanical titan, it was instead a being of flesh and blood underneath its armor. In a way, the collector felt a sense of respect for the beaten entity, for it was with its own strength alone that it challenged the collector. The collector would show its respect by consuming the being. It would regenerate all of its wounds by consuming this strange and powerful new creature and also attain heights of power never before seen. It would destroy the blade, useless as it was as an inorganic piece of metal, to prevent it from falling to any errant hands and then lay havoc upon the denizens of this planet. Judging by how nothing aided the being, it was apparent that it was the planet's most powerful line of defense, and all that lay behind it was free for consumption. The collector surged forwards, slower and weaker than before, but all the being could do in response was attempt to hold its blade with arms barely functional with how badly they were bruised, burned and cut. "Forgive me, my brethren," the being said, looking back at the planet behind it, faintly glowing strands of white hair floating around its bloody head. "Forgive me, all the mortals that believed in me. The chaos my death will cause. I hope you will all find it in your hearts to forgive me for it. But it will be nothing compared to the chaos this beast will wreak should I not do this." With a sudden burst of energy, the being raised the blade high above its head. "O Dawnrise, blade of infinity, bringer of light, I will entrust to you my life and so in return create strength for me as you have created life. To that which is worthy to receive your strength after my passing, I grant all my blessings." The collector did not care about this theatrical show. Any analysis of the being's physical form indicated it had no real energy to fight with. But surprisingly, the being did not try to run, it met the collector head-on. The being enveloped itself in a halo of power so bright that it seared all of the collector's optical capabilities out and in the moment of blindness, the being charged forwards, driving the blade deep into the collector's chest. The collector felt white-hot energy comparable to the sun liquefy and instantly evaporate its flesh. A moment later, an explosion rocked the orbit of the planet. It was a blast of light so bright and expansive that every being on the planet could witness it. Those on the day witnessed their world grow infinitely white while those on the other side of the planet saw night become day for just an instant. And so came the end of Solarian, High King of the Gods, and the Collector, Herald of the Collective. Or so the peoples and gods of the world would have been fortunate to believe. For the Collector had survived a single, small shard of its body surviving incineration and entry into the planet's atmosphere. It landed indiscriminately in the thick of a wild, overgrown forest, burning out a small clearing among towering trees that twisted high into the sky. From the crater emerged a grub no larger than a dog, all that the once mighty collector had been reduced to. But it had survived, and so it could still fulfill its purpose. This planet was dangerous, the collector determined. It had to be neutralized for the sake of the collective. Then, it would find its way back home. First thing was first, though. The collector had to survive, consume, adapt, and evolve to become the strongest being there was on this strange new planet. Chapter 2, Evolving from Nothing. The collector squirmed its way around the jungle floor. It had lost almost all of its adaptations, but perhaps most distressingly, it lost its connection to the greater collective hive mind. This was unacceptable, and it could not understand how this had happened. There was not a single weapon throughout the known galaxy capable of severing the psionic link that collectors had with the collective. And yet, the reality did not change that the link was gone. The collector adjusted to its disadvantages. Without the psionic link it held with the collective mind, it could not signal its location, and its access to the collective database of shared knowledge became extremely limited. However, it still retained some basic functions that allowed it to survive. It was still composed of segments of ultrafiber muscle, though far less dense and powerful than in its original state, as it could not possibly sustain such organic material with how little energy it had now. However, the muscle still allowed for quick, undulating movement reminiscent of a snake slithering across the leaf soil. The collector still retained basic senses that came with reducing itself to a larva. It had lost its sight, but fine hairs dotting its body were sensitive to all motion, allowing it to conjure up detailed, 360-degree imagery of its environment. Sound also registered through these vibration-sensitive hairs, allowing it to realize that as of now, its immediate surroundings were safe. Likely, the crash landing had scared off local fauna. This also indicated that there was little intelligent life in the area. Perfect to consume and regain strength. However, this planet was incredibly different. The collector could not match any of the plants or small animals it encountered with equivalents in its memory bank. This was truly a wholly new and foreign planet, and with it came dangers just as novel that put it on constant guard. Until it could develop its strength, it had to lie low. It checked its status for now, nothing how much it had degraded in strength. Metamorphosis level 101. Biomass level 0/100. Stored genetic material. Critical loss of stored genetic material detected. None. Adaptations. Internal systems. Critical loss of adaptations detected. Remaining adaptations. Ultrafiber musculature rank 1. External systems. Critical loss of adaptations detected. Remaining adaptations. Sensitive hairs rank 1. Weapons systems. Critical loss of adaptations detected. Remaining adaptations. None. Current form. Grub. The collector did not feel any panic, nor was it ever programmed to do so in any degree that would severely cripple its functions. This level of functions loss was within its observed calculations. It focused its mental and physical efforts instead on building up biomass to reach the next metamorphosis level. The collector spent its initial time feasting on plant life, chewing dead leaves fallen from the trees high above. Its once proud, building-sized jaws were reduced to a circular mouth lined with small, stubby teeth. Biomass gained +5. Biomass level 05/100. The collector kept eating leaves, branches, whatever it could get its mouth on. The voice in its head was the memory bank of the collective, a repository of information implanted in every collector at birth and useful for recognizing new species and developing new abilities. Though losing the psionic link meant that the collective memory system was limited, the basics were still the same. Evolution centered around two elements, biomass and genetic material. Biomass meant the consumption of raw organic material. The more complex the biomass and the more of it there was, the better, though quality certainly took precedence over quantity. In this case, it was plant matter. Maxing out on biomass would allow the collector to metamorphose to increase its strength and potentially change its form based on what it had eaten and thereby gain new adaptations. Metamorphosis would also allow it to redevelop an adaptation from the collective's vast evolutionary arsenal, though at its current state that ability would be at a much weaker version, just like how its ultrafiber muscles were significantly atrophied compared to the sinews padding its original, towering form that could support thousands of tons. The adaptations themselves fell under the categories of internal, external, and weapons-based systems. Internal and external systems generally indicated adaptations that would help, as their titles indicated, internal and external parts of the collector's body. Weapons systems were offensive bioweapons the collector could develop, but many of them required first a solidly built-up base of internal and external systems to support them. Genetic material was any new genetic material it could consume that would grant it new forms and, by extension, the powers associated with those forms. As of now, these plants were nothing special, providing nothing new. Plant life tended to develop similarly across planets with water, so it was no surprise that their genetic structure was not sufficiently distinct or special enough to produce abilities with. Were they poisonous plants, then the matter would be different, but the collector encountered none. In a pinch, the collector could also sacrifice biomass to heal itself by entering into a restorative stasis, though this was ill-advised because it rendered the collector immobile and wasted biomass at high rates which, especially in later levels of metamorphosis, would require increasingly larger volumes to replenish. Ultimately, though, to gain any kind of new form and power, the collector would have to metamorphose first. Right now, the collector wanted to focus on gaining enough biomass to metamorphose and redevelop the hardened carapace over its currently soft body regardless of what form it needed to assume. Survival was its top priority and it felt too exposed right now. Any good blaster or rail rifle could punch a hole through it. So the collector kept eating, munching a decent clearing across the crater it had landed in. Along the way, it gobbled up insects of various kinds here and there. Biomass gained plus 10. Biomass level, 15 100ths. New genetic material gained. Stored genetic material. Jungle spider. Black ant. Striped centipede. The collector took a moment to analyze its options but found them lacking. Certainly, these insectoid forms were interesting, but they did not hold particularly unique powers. Weak venom and small wings, mainly, but perhaps when enhanced and spliced with its own ultrafiber muscles and soon-to-be developed organic hyperalloy carapace, these forms would be more useful. The environmental temperature started to lower. Though the collector lacked ocular systems in its grub form, it did possess sensitive hairs and a mind capable of creating a general visual map of its surroundings based on vibrational input. It sensed that little light would penetrate the thick canopy of tree leaves above it, explaining the cool temperatures on the forest floor, but now it sensed an even more gradual yet marked drop in warmth. The collector judged it was nearing night and from a few basic calculations, deduced that this planet had a 24-hour daily cycle, so any creatures it encountered now were likely to be nocturnal. By now, local fauna had started to gain courage and repopulate the area. The collector could feel the stirs and heat of small mammals scurrying about, the rustle of creatures in the tree branches, and in the far distance, the thud of some sizable creature that the collector knew not to near until it was far stronger. The collector did not indiscriminately chew on plant matter anymore now. It did not want to attract too much attention. Yet it did need to quickly gain biomass to metamorphose. Metamorphosing would also allow it to change its form to something a little more efficient than a worm, so it had to eat. It decided to be riskier and attempt hunting some of the small mammals scurrying about. They would be far more complex and laden with higher quality biomass. The collector crawled into a patch of thick grass and flattened its pliable body so that it was concealed. Then it waited, feeling with its hairs for something to near. A short while later, something did. A rabbit, small and hungry. Its fur was midnight black and perfectly camouflaged in the darkness, but the camouflage was useless against the collector, which saw not with eyes, but feeling. It hopped forwards to the collector's hiding spot, wanting to munch on the tall, nourishing grass. The collector was absolutely still and patient. It had the collective knowledge of countless predatory species across many planets, so waiting and ambushing like this was a familiar tactic ingrained into every cell of its body. The rabbit made one little hop too close, and the collector surged forwards, its ultrafiber muscles straining as its maw opened up, clasping on the rabbit's leg. The rabbit mewled as it kicked and tried to escape, but the collector's grip was unbreakable by such a weak creature. The collector sucked in, its segmented body undulating as it forced the rabbit further and further into its mouth, swallowing it bit by bit whole. When it drew in the rabbit completely, slurping in its ears like noodles, it checked its status. Biomass gained plus 35. Biomass level, 50 100ths. The collector was pleased. The rabbit had provided a good amount of biomass, but it also held something even more precious, memories. Non-sentient, dumber creatures such as the rabbit had scarcely few memories to retrieve, but there were some tied with strong instincts that the collector could easily pluck out. Not that it was possible to truly extract accurate memories from more sentient, intelligent species. Individually, cut off from the support of the collective, it did not have the processing power to extract full memories from sentient beings. Memories from sentient beings tended to be a jumble, a sea of remembered and forgotten thoughts laced with hidden knowledge and emotions and any other manner of variable that could diminish the accuracy of the memories. But the collector would deal with that issue when it came to it. For now, it sifted through the rabbit's simpler mind. Among the rabbit's memories included awareness of some of the predators in this jungle and also the location to the rabbit's den where its offspring lay. The den was not far. The collector slithered its way over, wary not to alert any dangerous presences. It knew now there were large felines and short, white-skinned humanoids in the jungle that lay in wait to ambush just as it had done to the rabbit. Thankfully, it did not encounter any such creatures as it found the den, a little dugout concealed by taller grasses and foliage a small way from the crash site. The collector forced its way into the den. Though it was larger than the rabbit, its worm-like form was malleable, able to squeeze into most surfaces. Inside the den was a golden treasure, a litter of 12 rabbits squealing in a terror enforced by instinct as they gazed at the hideous, saw-like mouth of the collector. The collector swallowed them whole. It did not want to lose any biomass to stray bleeding. And as it consumed the babies, another boon came. With its 360-degree range of sensory vision, it sensed the aggressive approach of another rabbit, likely the male counterpart of the female it consumed, attempting to bite the collector's tail outside the den in defense of his offspring. While the collector's mouth ground up the babies, its tail lashed backwards like a club as the rabbit leapt forwards to bite, striking the small creature on the head and breaking its neck. Without wasting time, the collector withdrew from the burrow and went to consuming the father. With the whole family in its stomach, it checked its status once more. Biomass gained plus 50. Biomass level 100 100ths. Metamorphosis available. New genetic material available. Stored genetic material. Midnight rabbit. Jungle spider. Black ant. Striped centipede. Excellent. Now the collector could finally change out its form to something more agile and suitable to the forest and also gain a carapace to defend itself with. However, with each metamorphosis level it gained, it knew that undergoing further metamorphoses would become increasingly difficult, requiring more and more biomass. To reach its original state as a 200,000-ton paragon of annihilation would likely require consuming most of this planet. But a start was a start. And so, the collector underwent its metamorphosis, hiding in a thicket of grass as a cocoon of soft, beating flesh morphed around it. Its larval body melted into pure, primordial, genetic ooze. From here, creation was its plaything. First off, it had to decide on a new form. It could choose to consume a maximum of 3 stored genetic samples and splice them together to create a new form or go with just 1 or 2. Had the collector still been linked to the collective hive mind, it could have done so much more. It would have been able to process more than 3 genetic samples. It could have redeveloped adaptations that did not originally belong to its initial warrior form strain, instead opting to spread parasitic devastation or disease through infector or dominator strains. For now, though, it was limited to restoring only what it originally came to this planet with. Regardless, it was inefficient to waste mental energy on hypotheticals. Either way, its next form would be what it would be stuck with until it reached its second metamorphosis, so it had to choose wisely. Unfortunately, it only had 1 mammal and various insects to choose from. The rabbit as a mammal would grant a warm-blooded body that could more efficiently use the ultrafiber musculature adaptation the collector already had. Not to mention that the rabbit already possessed fur which was compatible with the sensitive hair's adaptation. Compatibility was important, for the collector could not infinitely grow its adaptations atop its body. They had to match the creature bases it utilized to some degree, lest their manifestation cost too much biomass to manifest. The insectoid forms would provide extra limbs and a familiarity with carapaces that it could use later to more efficiently redevelop its organic hyperalloy carapace. From the beginning, the collective formed the organic hyperalloy through the study and melding of hundreds of different insectoid species across countless planets. Making sure to take forms that could easily interface with the collector's existing adaptations also had the benefit of speeding up the metamorphosis process. A crucial factor to consider, as right now, mid-metamorphosis, the collector was absolutely defenseless, easily killed if anything or anyone popped the soft, fleshy cocoon it evolved itself in. In a rush, the collector morphed together the rabbit, spider, and centipede genes. Underscore 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 underscore. The metamorphosis was quick. The collector was not working with difficult or complicated genetic material after all. In the span of 10 minutes, the collector went from primordial goo into a fully formed thing. If the denizens of this world could witness it, they would surely scream in terror. It fused what it believed to be all the useful traits of a rabbit, spider, and centipede together, and the resulting amalgamation paid no heed to conventional senses of aesthetics. Metamorphosis level 1-2. Biomass level 100 100 0/100. Store genetic material. Black ant. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 1-2. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 1-2. Minus new organic hyperalloy carapace rank 1. Weapons systems. None. Current form. Jungle spider, striped centipede, midnight rabbit. To any of the sentient species on this world, it would have been an abomination. The collector's legs and body were that of a rabbit's, for it believed the rabbit's legs most suited to extensive movement. It also assumed the rabbit's body in order to have a more developed, warm-blooded circulatory system so as to fuel its muscles better. However, its skin was covered with a gleaming, white-plated carapace that looked like a full suit of bony armor. In the seams of the armor, where the joints were exposed to maximize mobility, fur poked out, standing straight and sensitive to all manner of vibrations in the air and land. Though its general body was that of a rabbit's, small front legs included, its head was all but. It had assumed a centipede's head, armored and patterned in the red and black bands of the striped centipede. Twin pincers lined either side of its flat, hardened head, acting like cleavers with which to slice apart or crush anything unlucky to near it. Multiple eyes dotted its head, a trait from the spider, providing heightened compound vision to pick out small details. Its rabbit feet ended in hideously curved claws dripping with centipede venom. Its tail was long and bulbed at the end, forming into a spined spinneret that could eject powerful webbing. 4 arachnid limbs sprouted from its back, becoming versatile tools with which to stab, slash, balance upon, climb, and grab with. All in all, this monstrosity of nature stood a meter tall, far larger than any insect or rabbit. The collector clicked its centipede mandibles in satisfaction. This form would be competent in the jungle, capable of competing even with the jungle felines that roamed these wilds. Knowing this, the collector set to hunting for real now. It now had the power and durability to hunt larger and stronger creatures for biomass. And it needed to. Each successive metamorphosis level needed significantly more biomass than the one before to fuel it. But every level would make things easier, ranking up all adaptations, increasing their efficacy to minor degrees until at ranks in multiples of 5 they could develop sub-adaptations to significantly boost their capabilities. In time, the collector would once more reign over this world, heralding its end. Chapter 3, Hunting. The collector hunted, and it was efficient, making maximal use of its new body and the heightened capabilities it afforded. One thing that the collector retained that made it supreme above most of the jungle fauna was its intellect. It could still think and strategize, drawing upon predatory instincts wired into its very genetic code to ensure that its movements were absolutely efficient, deadly, and quiet. Over the next few hours of the night, the collector slew a few more rabbits, found a small pond to slake its thirst, and even took down an entire deer. It had even set up a massive web between the shade of 2 tree trunks, invisible to those not wary, to provide another source of potential biomass. Little bugs such as spiders and centipedes do not strike fear at their size, but when they are expanded to a meter, they become horrifying predators. Normally, the collector would not have been able to retain such a large size while utilizing insect genetic material unless it roamed a particularly oxygen-dense world, but somehow, something in this world's atmosphere made it possible to retain its mass. The collector stuffed the last of the slain deer's red flesh into its jaws, its 4 arachnid arms picking apart even the bones of the creature clean. Then it dismantled the skeleton, consuming it piecemeal like crunchy snacks. At this level of biological complexity, the collector could recognize what tasted good or bad, and this deer most certainly tasted nice, as did most flesh at this point. The more complex the collector became, the more its appetite would become predatory and carnivorous, seeking out larger, stronger, and denser life forms. Biomass gained plus 10. Biomass level 10 100ths. The collector clicked its mandibles in irritation. It would take a while to reach the next level. Progress was slow now. It needed more. Intelligent life would help the most, considering that intelligence was perhaps the most complex of evolutionary developments, but it could not risk fighting intelligent species. If they had even 1,000th of the power that being of light had, then the collector stood no chance in its current state. Any insignificant tinkerer with even small munitions arms could destroy the collector. As it contemplated its future struggles, the collector made its way back to its spider web. Before the web was even visible, it knew it had caught something. It could feel desperate vibrations in the air as something thrashed against the powerful silk. The collector scurried into leafy cover, nearing the trapped prey with stealth. It was best to kill whatever was trapped quickly and stealthily so as to prevent as much retaliation as possible. It did not want to waste any biomass on regenerating its wounds. In the cover of a particularly thick overgrowth of vines that drooped down from a low branch, the collector could make out the web it placed. In the middle thrashed a small, humanoid creature. Its skin was a black that glistened with sweat as it exerted itself, trying to break the silk. However, it was too weak, being a measly meter tall with pitiful musculature and bone density. It was bald with a large nose and beady eyes that glowed yellow in the dark, indicating nocturnal vision. Its mouth was lined with sharp teeth visible as it shouted gibberish in a high-pitched snarl. The collector recognized this thing was somewhat intelligent. First, it covered its privates with a ragged loincloth. Second, it wore a belt upon which lay tied a rudimentary stone knife. It kept squealing out the same set of vocal intonations, indicating an intelligible word to others of its kind. It also indicated that there were likely more in the vicinity. The collector, however, did not give the creature a chance to further vocalize its distress. It took this moment to silence the creature before its cries could draw its brethren nearer. With a pounce, the collector leapt through the vines and landed just in front of the bound humanoid. The humanoid's eyes widened in a moment of fear before the collector thrust one of its arachnid back limbs through the humanoid's throat, tearing apart its jugular vein. The humanoid gurgled out a stream of blood, eyes even wider in death as it fell limp, tongue lolling out its mouth. The collector unraveled the humanoid from the web and savagely tore it apart, its 4 arachnid limbs extending claws that utterly massacred the body. It stuffed in chunks of meat and organs in its mouth as quick as it could, slurping off blood from its claws as it did so. The humanoid was utterly delicious. Truly, this was an intelligent life form. Its wondrous taste was evident enough of that. However, it was not nearly as intelligent as most of the species the collector knew of. The humanoid was a barbaric, simple-minded creature capable of little more than crafting rudimentary stone tools and shouting basic commands and requests. The collector froze. It could sense additional presences nearing by. They were of similar size and build to this humanoid. Its brethren. The collector did not have time to consume all of its slaughtered prey's remains, so it took what remained of the mangled corpse and ran up a tree, using its spider limbs like picks to crawl across the bark. From high above, the collector looked down, eagerly assessing the situation. The collector witnessed with interest as the humanoids roamed below, their stone daggers drawn in alarm. There were only 3. One of them knelt by a bloody patch of grass, the only remnant of their companion. The other 2 circled around, wary for attack. They grunted to each other, and the collector with its sharp hearing could barely make out their intonations. It seemed that these humanoids were a little more intelligent than the collector gave them credit for. They were engaging in a good amount of conversation, their faces animated with fear or concern as they squabbled with each other. The collector was curious. It checked its status. Biomass gained +10. Biomass level 2100s. Genetic material gained. Stored genetic material. Minus new black goblin. Black ant. 10 per humanoid it consumed. Not a bad rate. Far better than even the deer. The 3 blissfully unaware humanoids beneath became all the more appetizing, but the collector did not move yet. It instead searched the black goblin it had just killed for knowledge. When creatures became intelligent, it became far harder to extract their knowledge and memories. Basic instincts were programmed with biology, but higher thoughts and memories were more delicate, harder to maintain within a body after death and even harder to absorb. The great collective hive mind with its immense scale and power had the capacity to extract knowledge from entire species with its unparalleled psionic processing power, but the collector itself, now cut off from the hive mind, was limited to absorbing one key memory or fragment of knowledge from an intelligent creature. However, this was enough. It decided to learn the language of these primitive creatures. The unintelligible squabbling below became understandable, albeit a little faint with how high up the tree the collector was. "We get out now," said one of the 2 goblins guarding their friend, still checking the bloodstains. "No beast here," replied the goblin kneeling in the blood. "Strange. Very strange. Humans close, so no beast. So how Fricky die?" "No important," said the other goblin. It was shaking a little, its hold on the dagger unsteady. "Important is danger near. We leave to den. We tell Drafk." "We tell Drafk," said the goblins in unison, nodding in agreement at the idea. The collector was pleased. So, there was a den of these creatures. Enough of them, and it could evolve straight to the next metamorphosis level. But for now, it would claim the feast standing before its eyes already. With a swift motion, it scurried downwards. Underscore 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 underscore. Up. Up. One of the goblins screamed, but it was too late. The collector had landed on the goblin, having launched itself down from 10 meters up. The sheer weight of the collector's dense musculature and carapace was enough to splatter the goblin on the forest floor, shattering its each and every bone. The other two goblins took a look at the collector, at its powerfully muscled, clawed and blood-stained hind legs, its 6 arachnid limbs protruding from the back like prehensile spines, and its insectoid head clicking with mandibles like axe heads, all 8 beady black eyes poised with hunger at their defenseless forms, and froze. The sight of the collector, a repulsive amalgamation of mammal and insect oversized to hideous proportions, overloaded the goblins' fear instincts and kept them still for a second. That second was easily enough for the collector to extend 2 of its arachnid limbs forwards, thrusting them through both goblins' heads simultaneously. With a slick pop, the limbs withdrew, leaving 2 neat, circular holes in the goblins' skulls. Over in a few seconds. The goblins were aided by their primal instincts, but they were also slowed down by them. Fear had caught them, seized them by their throats, rendered their minds to mush and their feet to putty for a second, and that spelt the end of their lives. In contrast, the collector was not driven by instinct. No, it used instinct, used it as an efficient part of its body, just as it used its claws or limbs or tails. It felt no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. The collector wasted no time in devouring the goblins. Even the fastest butcher in all the realm would have marveled at the collector's speed in dissecting and consuming them. The collector had an in-depth understanding of the goblin's anatomies now, having consumed one and cross-referenced its biological structure across the collective memories it retained, allowing the collector to accurately predict where each and every one of the goblin's vitals were, where the joints were easiest to pop, the tendons easiest to slice, the flesh easiest to tear. Biomass gained plus 30. Biomass level, 5100s. A horde of these goblins would face no challenge to the collector now, not because of strength. 10 or so of these would have the manpower to injure the collector, but because the collector knew their behaviors, instincts, and vitals now and could exploit these to systematically execute them. From the goblins it had just consumed, the collector also absorbed key bits of knowledge, the location of their den, their numbers, and the being they called Draft. The den was not far from here. A little ways further in the jungle. In a safer area where no larger predators roamed. It was an underground network of tunnels and burrows that had been previously made by a different creature. There were quite a few of these goblins. 20 in total, led by a much larger, stronger variant of the species called a hobgoblin whose name was evidently Draft. The collector made its way towards by treetop, scurrying up a tree trunk and leaping from branch to branch. The goblins lived underground and did not pay much attention to the trees, so this would grant the collector the highest amount of stealth in approaching. As the collector moved, it calculated its chances. This Draft could definitely challenge it in a test of strength, and when aided by his goblins, would have an upper hand. It was confident that should it face Draft in single combat, it could win provided it had the benefit of an ambush. At the same time, the 20 goblins by themselves proved no threat either. It was only when Draft and his goblins were together that they became a significant threat. Then the solution was to eliminate one or the other. Divide and conquer. Isolate and consume. Chapter 4, Hobgoblin Hunt. The collector watched from above, keeping absolutely still as it watched the den. It hid itself in a thicket of leaves amidst a tree overlooking the den, and it had watched for an entire day, from last night to this night, moving only to track the den's denizens. It could regulate its metabolic processes to a slowed state such that it almost never had to eat or drink, and its bodily processes were absolutely efficient to the point where nothing it consumed was excreted as waste. These combined traits were what originally allowed it to traverse the vast empty reaches of space unafflicted by weaknesses such as hunger or thirst. The collector observed there was a large pit in the ground from where the goblins routinely went in and out, carrying food, sticks, rocks, and leaves. Every so often, Draft would emerge. He was 2 meters tall, heavily muscled, and more built for combat than the goblins. A quick visual analysis indicated dense bones, thick limbs, and elongated tusks that jutted from his mouth. His overall structure, however, was similar to that of his goblin kin, with the same yellow, beady eyes and blackened skin. Presumably, his vitals were the same as well, for it seemed that they were all part of the same evolutionary branch of creatures. The collector memorized Draft and the goblins' patterns of movement. The goblins made routine trips out to secure food, and Draft occasionally came with them to hunt larger prey. The movement of the goblins was relatively random, which was expected considering there were 20 of them. There would always be variables as to where they were. However, there were two important details of note worth. Draft himself had set patterns to his movement. Every so often, he would isolate himself from the goblins to go to his own personal watering hole with clearer water than that the common goblins drank from. Here, he would drink and then expel excretions before returning to the den. In addition, the goblins were nocturnal, sleeping during the day, but Draft was active both day and night. The collector clicked its mandibles as it settled on its ambush plan. It would ambush Draft when he left for water at noon, when daylight was bright and his goblin entourage was sleeping. Early the next morning, the collector laid its ambush. It went to Draft's watering hole and extracted as much striped centipede and jungle spider venom as it could from its jaws, pooling it into the water and mixing it. The toxic liquid, iridescent blue with hints of green, dripped into the clear pond, clouding it just a little. The venom from both insects was not particularly strong, unable to kill even a goblin in normal doses, but at the mass quantities the collector could produce significantly larger than any little bug, it was enough to kill a goblin or slow down Draft. Then the collector weaved spots of thick webbing around the watering hole, being careful to avoid the well-worn path that Draft used and ensuring they were not noticeable. In the chaos of battle, Draft would have to move away from this path, and here he would find webbing to tangle his feet. The collector laid in wait, high up in a tree above the watering hole. This next victim would prove to be a challenge, but a worthy one. No doubt it would provide enough biomass to ascend to the next metamorphosis level. Underscore 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 underscore. Just 10 minutes shy of noon, when the sun hung low in the sky, Draft came. The collector tensed its muscles, readying to pounce as it tracked Draft's every move. Draft stumbled forwards, yawning as he absent-mindedly scratched his genitals through a dirt-brown loincloth. Alarmingly, he dragged a wooden club behind him. This was outside the collector's calculations. The club was brutish, roughly carved from a tree trunk with splintering spikes left at the end to gore any unlucky victims. It was no gravitron mace, but at the collector's current state, it was still a threat. Draft's muscles rippled as he knelt by the pond, cupping some of the water and greedily shoving it in his mouth. He took a single gulp of water before he started coughing, spitting out the rest. The collector took note. By its calculations, it determined that Draft had taken in a dosage of venom not strong enough to immobilize him, but still potent enough to give him a general sense of numbness and slow down his movements. It waited now for an opportunity to strike. It had to make sure everything went perfectly to compensate for Draft's club. Draft took an angry look at the water and punched it. A great splash of water erupted upwards, a testament to his strength. Having vented enough immediate rage, he turned around with intent to order his goblins to find more water. However, the precise second Draft turned his back, the collector struck, using its powerful rabbit legs to eject itself down from the trees like a missile. It had its spider limbs stuck forwards like blades, aiming to impale through the hobgoblin's heart to end things in an instant. Surprisingly, Draft had the reactions to turn around. However, he did not have time to swat the collector away, only to cross his arms to defend against impact. The collector adjusted its angle of attack mid-air to adjust for the sudden defense, for now Draft protected his heart with his burly arms. The collector twisted, angling its descent a little further downwards, and pierced straight through Draft's right thigh, aiming for maximal immobilization if it could not ensure a lethal initial blow. Before Draft could retaliate, the collector withdrew its spider limbs and leapt backwards by pushing off the hobgoblin's body. The collector flicked blood on its claws away and onto the grass, eyeing the hobgoblin intently, analyzing, hunting. Draft roared in pain, one hand clutching at his now useless right leg and another wildly swinging the club, swatting at empty air. The collector had severed exactly the tendons and muscles required for leg movement in one fell, surgical swoop. "Curse you," said Draft, spittle frothing from his mouth. He tried to stand, but the best he could do was awkwardly limp, unable to put any weight on his right side. The collector did not respond, nor could it due to a lack of vocal cords. Its 8 eyes focused on Draft, looking only for any weaknesses to exploit. His right side was open. Any attacks from there would be difficult for the hobgoblin to retaliate against. It would also force him to put more pressure on his right leg, speeding up his already profuse bleeding. "What are you?" said Draft through heavy breaths. "You monster. No, you not monster I see before. You must be human's pet. Human's monster." The collector used Draft's wasted effort in shouting as a moment to attack, pouncing to Draft's right side and striking at his throat with a clawed spider limb. It felt a surge of anger to even be considered the pet of a lowly tinkering race such as a human, but the anger, like any of the emotions it could feel, did not cloud it, but honed its movements. Draft, however, was surprisingly quick, using his one good leg to push backwards to narrowly dodge the swipe. It was evident that he was used to combat, his movements sharpened and trained. The collector recalculated the movements necessary to hit Draft. An expression of surprise came upon Draft's face as he moved back, past his familiar trail, and stepped on a mass of webbing with his one good foot. He lost balance, toppling over backwards. The collector leapt into the air and landed on Draft's chest, aiming to use its powerful mandibles to sever his throat entirely. Draft, however, was quick and devastatingly strong. He reacted to the collector's bite, quickly using his free hand to grab one of the collector's mandibles before it could close on his throat. With a guttural grunt, Dreg ripped off the mandible entirely. The collector did not flinch or react. Such movements were inefficient. It registered damage and took to a more wary approach. It moved downwards a bit, dodging an attempt by Draft to grab it, and placed its sizable, full weight on the hobgoblin's damaged leg to keep him on the ground. Then the collector's 6 arachnid arms, their sharp, clawed tips exposed, savagely began tearing into Draft. Death by 1,000 cuts. Draft screamed in pain as he covered his face and chest with his arms, trying to preserve his vitals. However, the collector was a surgeon, and this was its operating table. Its attacks, fast and savage as they were not wild. They were precise, every single one meant calculated and meant to inflict as much damage as possible, cutting at tendons and major blood vessels. One swipe punctured a lung, finding the soft tissue through ribs. Draft shifted his arms instinctively lower to defend himself, leaving one half of his face open for a split second. Enough time for a limb to skewer out his left eye. Every single tiny movement the hobgoblin wasted and every single instance of pain that slowed it were openings for the collector to abuse. With a final burst of strength reserved only to those knowing death was near, Draft roared and abandoned his defense, reaching for his club and swinging it. The collector immediately swerved backwards, but Draft's attack inflicted some measure of damage. Following a sickening crunch, 3 of the collector's arachnid limbs sailed through the air, landing on the forest floor still twitching and oozing blackish-green blood from their dismembered tips. The collector could feel pain, but not enough to adversely affect it. Just enough to let it know that damage had been inflicted. Any more pain would have been useless, and anything useless biologically had long been cut away from it. Draft groaned weakly. He was bleeding from dozens of cuts, all of them arguably lethal, and sprays of arterial red spurted from his thigh and several ruptured blood vessels. The collector circled Draft's prone and weak body. It was cautious, not willing to enter his attack range. Even though Draft was soon to bleed to death, it did not want to risk any form of retaliation that might have injured it. That was one of the primary laws of a predator: take no risk. Among predators and prey, if prey could inflict even a single crippling wound, then the meal was not worth it. Draft made several attempts to attack, weakly lunging forwards or trying to swing its club. Each time, the collector simply leapt backwards just enough to dodge before circling again like a vulture waiting for its weakened carrion to slump over. Eventually, Draft knelt in grass drenched in his blood, breath wheezing from his damaged lung. He struggled to keep his eyes open and his body shook, resisting shock from blood loss. "Kill me," gurgled out Draft. The collector kept circling. "Kill me." The collector ignored Draft. It wondered why the creature was so eager for death. All it had to do was be patient. Draft grunted in defeat and acceptance of death, letting go of his club and using both arms to try and turn to his side to bleed out with a little more comfort. The collector saw Draft give up the club and struck once more, knowing that it was now risk-free to attack. It skewered a spider limb through the oversized goblin's empty eye socket, scrambling the soft brain beneath it. The collector was impressed. Draft had been a worthy foe to its current state. Collectors were created with a combat-oriented mindset that found value in battle and consuming strong opponents. This was the most compatible independent personality for a life of endless battle, of fighting and consuming the strongest and best genetic material across the cosmos. In contrast, a biological robot programmed only to consume would not have the independent thought to adapt to battle situations and find itself outmaneuvered by the ingenuity of tinkering, spacefaring races. That was why when the collector consumed Draft, it did so relatively slowly, cutting into the hobgoblin's body with slow, measured slices to enjoy the flavor. It wished to savor the taste of an enemy that had managed to wound it. Biomass gained plus 50. Biomass level, 100 100ths. Genetic material gained. Black goblin. Black hobgoblin. Black ant. As predicted, the black hobgoblin, being powerful, large, and somewhat intelligent, granted an immense amount of biomass capable of allowing the collector to reach its next stage of evolution. Chapter 5, Hobgoblin Evolution. By this point, Draft had been reduced to a few bones, all that was once left of the proud warrior hobgoblin. The collector leapt up a tree. It did so awkwardly, having lost 3 of its spider limbs, but it knew how to compensate for the lost limbs with expert ease, shifting its weight from side to side so that it could rappel up the tree at a speed that would have been hard to believe it was injured. There, it curled up and began its evolution. At lower metamorphosis levels, it could not afford to be picky with the genetic material it had, as growing stronger at any cost was its prime directive. It would use what it had. The collector's body began melting, secreting a slimy ooze that formed a cocoon over it. It was more monstrous than before, with large, beating veins streaking across its glossy surface. The collector also did not melt into complete primordial liquid this time, instead condensing into a sphere that pulsated like a heart at the center of the flesh cocoon. In its current state, the collector could not construct a form utilizing more than 3 genetic bases. As it reached higher metamorphosis levels and gained more capacity to process the material, this would increase, but for now, it would have to make do with what it had. There were 2 new pieces of genetic material, the black goblin and the black hobgoblin. However, the hobgoblin was simply superior in every aspect, and so the collector chose to switch out its rabbit genes with that of the hobgoblin. Although it did not like assuming a humanoid form because bipedal humanoids evolved through a reliance on tools and not biological might, it was still the strongest base form it could achieve. It retained its spider and centipede genes, useful as they were for extra limbs, compound vision, webbing, and minor venom. The metamorphosis would take close to 30 minutes this time, as the collector was undergoing significant physiological changes. During this time, it searched the hobgoblin's memories using the keyword of human. Although the collector had ignored the hobgoblin's angry bleating during combat, it had remembered his words. Judging from the way the hobgoblin spoke about humans, it would seem they were an intelligent species, perhaps in direct conflict with these primitives. If they were anything like the humans the collector was familiar with, then this world would be a significant challenge to assimilate. Humans were one of the spacefaring races that resisted the collective, and though they had lost planet after planet to the hive mind, they still survived and fought with a tenacity that belied the weakness of their fleshy forms. By now, after nearly a century of warring against the collective, the humans had developed weapons of war easily capable of wiping out the collector in its current state. Finding out more information about these humans was imperative. The memories came. It was obvious that the hobgoblin held powerful emotions of humans, with many of his memories tied to that keyword. They came like hazy recollections or half-remembered dreams, murky and almost surreal, lacking in many details, but still understandable. ________. A memory. The hobgoblin running. It was young and small, no larger than the goblins it lorded over now. It was injured, with burns and cuts littering its body. Behind it stood the entryway to a cave, smoke curling out from within. Powerful emotions of sadness and rage. The humans had come and exterminated the hobgoblin and his kin. Their swords and spears had skewered many friends, decapitated his parents, and dealt him many painful wounds. A vow of revenge against the humans. Later, the hobgoblin was grown, leading a large tribe of goblins and hobgoblins to a human village. He rallied his kind, raising his club into the air. He promised death and destruction to the humans. Their food and women would be the spoils of war. A cheer. Later, the hobgoblin lay bleeding under a tree, arrows skewered in his side. The battle had failed. Strong humans had appeared. Another vow of vengeance. He would find more goblins to his cause in the jungles, build up his strength and attack once more. _________. Though the memories were exceptionally unclear, fogged over by emotion and other useless baggage that the collector did not have the capacity to adequately even feel or perceive, the collector could still tell that the humans on this world were far different than those the collective had encountered elsewhere. They were far, far more primitive, wielding sticks and chunks of iron and little else more. It would not have to worry about blaster bolts that could tear apart its carapace. Exosuits that had the strength to tear it in its current state from limb to limb. seeker drones that would track its unique biological signatures and dispatch it with arrays of invasive explosives too fast and too small to defend against. Perhaps the humans of this world were a subspecies of human cut off from the main body. Or maybe they were a divergent but similar evolutionary line, for it was a fact that bipedal tinkerers seem to evolve similarly throughout the stars. No matter. The collector would consume them all in due time. That they were weak and primitive would only hasten their ends. The collector burst from its cocoon and immediately fell from the tree. It had grown far too large to scurry about on treetops, being almost 2.5 meters tall. It oriented itself before it crashed into the forest floor, making sure to land on its 2 feet. The collector grunted as it moved its body, flexing its muscle and wriggling its extremities to improve blood flow that had been stemmed during metamorphosis. It did not like assuming a bipedal form. All the races the collective had destroyed had been bipedal tinkerers too weak to use their natural strength. Bipedalism came to be a symbol of relying on tools over biological might. But no matter. It could easily discard this current form following its next evolution. As of now, the collector looked far less hideous. It was a towering mass of muscle plated with smooth, bony carapace tinted black from Hobgoblin's genes. Once more, 6 arachnid arms ripped out from its back. They were stronger now, thicker and padded with more muscle underneath the sleek, black carapace. This, coupled with the innate hydraulic movement system inherent to arachnid legs, would mean that these 6 limbs were far faster than its regular mammalian arms, though to maintaining the efficiency of the blood-based hydraulics meant sacrificing some muscular mass. A plus about this hobgoblin genetic base was that it was extremely compatible with the collector's natural ultrafiber muscle adaptation, as the main reason the hobgoblin was so much more muscular and stronger than the normal goblin was due to a mutation that affected its muscular hypertrophy and bone density. It was simply a matter of assimilating that gene into its ultrafiber muscle adaptation. In this manner, it was possible to upgrade and enhance adaptations the collector already had. This was the sort of continuous evolution and improvement that the collective did, though on a far smaller scale. The collector's head was a mix of insect and humanoid, being humanoid in shape but armored entirely in black carapace. 2 long, black antennae emerged from its forehead, dotted with its sensitive hairs adaptation. It retained its mandibles, which sloped down from its temples to its proper mouth, acting like chin guards. It checked its status. Metamorphosis level 2-3. Biomass level 100-100 0/100. Stored genetic material: black goblin, black ant. Adaptations: internal systems, ultrafiber muscles rank 2-3. External systems: sensitive hairs rank 2-3. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 1-2. Weapons systems: minus new monomolecular claws rank 1. Current form: jungle spider striped centipede black hobgoblin. The collector was pleased with its new adaptation. It would console the fact that it had to assume a humanoid form with the opportunity to develop one of its natural abilities that it had missed the most, monomolecular claws. It watched as almost metallic white claws curved like scythes emerged from its fingertips and protruded from its feet. It generated larger spikes on its elbows to use as stabbing and slicing weapons, compensating for the inefficiency of having so many frail and tiny bones in its hand, a common trait among tinkering species. Monomolecular claws were one of the crowning evolutions of the collective, being extraordinarily powerful tools and yet incredibly genetically efficient. To put it simply, they were composed of the same durable organic hyperalloy base as collector's carapace, but their edges had adapted to a different structure sourced through an unique predatory species on a harsh, metal-dense planet where metal and flesh melded together. The result was that the claws thinned to a razor-sharp, monomolecular edge capable of splitting apart substances at the molecular level, resulting in a sharpness unparalleled across the cosmos, capable of matching any superheated plasmoid blade or vibrosaber. As of now, the collector's offensive capabilities with its claws was devastating. Even at the height of its power, the sharpness of its claws was the same, making it one of the most efficient adaptations it could have obtained. The only reason it had not obtained it before was because it had prioritized the carapace for survival. The biggest flaw of these claws right now, however, was the fact that their durability was tied to their rank level, meaning that though they could slice through any known matter, they were brittle, capable of breaking apart by sufficient or appropriately applied force at the correct angles. In celebration of regaining one of its prized adaptations, the collector decided that it would feast, and there was no better feast waiting for him than at the now defenseless goblin den now that Draft was dead. Chapter 6, Goblin Nest Hunt. The entry to the den was quiet. It was a sizable pit in the ground, easily enough for the hobgoblin to have went in and out of, and covered with piles of sticks and a layer of leaves to camouflage it with the grassy environment around it. Presumably, the goblins did not want any unwanted visitors during the day when they slept. By now, afternoon had barely dawned. The temperature was still on the colder side, however, even at the peak of day when sunlight exposure should have been at its maximum. The collector looked up, peering at the sun through gaps in the canopy of branches and leaves above. It stared at the sun in questioning. Now that the collector had developed a sufficiently complex ocular system, it could take in wavelengths of colors that matched what the hobgoblin itself could. This also included the ability to perceive shapes and outlines clearly in the dark, but, as the collector understood, these evolutions still did not explain the aberrant nature of the sun's visual appearance in this world. The sun was entirely black, covered as if in eclipse, and yet, light still shone from it as if it was entirely unobscured. There were certain tinkering races that could construct great spheres around their suns to harvest its energy, and for a moment, the collector wondered whether such a class of civilization existed here independent of the primitive humans, but the possibility seemed vanishingly low. From orbit, the planet looked largely undeveloped, still covered in vast swathes of undisturbed nature. It decided to attribute the unnatural state of the sun as a visual anomaly created through light wavelengths interacting with properties in this world's atmosphere, though exactly what those properties were it did not know. Nor did it particularly care so long as they did not pose a threat to it or provide a resource for any tinkering species here. Yet any civilization here would be pitifully primitive, unable even to fight against and dominate the ecosystem of its home planet, let alone harbor extraplanetary or interstellar capabilities. This made the collector more confident in its hunting, and yet, it still knew to be careful, to lay low until it had further knowledge of this world. After all, there was that thing. That great construct or creature of light that could match the collector even when it was in its prime battle-ready state. Remembering that threat steadied the collector's focus. It trained its mind on the hunt at hand, listening. Insects and birds alike chirped aplenty, not knowing they were singing to a scene of impending massacre. Earthy scents lingered in the air. The smell of green flora and musky traces of goblins dominated the air, but there were no other scents. There would be no interference. The collector was thorough as it approached the entrance of the goblin nest. It hunched over the den and extended its burly arm with a silent, gliding motion that utterly belied its brawn. There was not a single rustle or crackle as the collector picked apart the sticks and leaves that made up the entrance, uncovering the den. With the den bare, the collector observed that it sloped downwards into the earth and, using its night vision, saw that it led to a much larger cavern sufficient in size for 20 goblins to rest. The collector crawled in with a measure of difficulty as it was larger than the hobgoblin, and the den itself was made to accommodate at maximum capacity the hobgoblin's size, probably to deter entry by any larger predator. However, the collector had control over its musculature at a fine level that no ordinary species possessed, and it twitched and undulated and condensed its muscle fibers so that it seemed to shrink and warp, twisting its way into the den while making a bare minimum of sound. Now inside, the collector felt that the air underground was even colder, almost frigid. Each of its warm-blooded breaths left a trail of fog to mark it. It took its hand, now humanoid in shape, and extended an index finger. Fine lines of spider silk emerged from the fingertip, glinting in the few errant rays of sunlight that draped into the dark of the pit's entrance. It used its finger to draw up a web, sealing the entrance shut. The pit became darker, the webbing blotting out the sunlight. Nothing would come in. Nothing would leave. There would be no survivors. No wasted biomass. The goblin den was simple in structure. One large cavern where all 20 goblins slept, sprawled about and snoring. Underground, it was dark, but the collector's night vision and antennae could sense each and every one of these little creatures, their minute movements, the quick rhythm of their breathing, the beating of their small and fragile hearts. It was a testament to the collector's silence that it could stalk its way to the middle of all of them without alerting them at all. Or perhaps it was a testament to their laziness. Either way, it was weakness. Prey should always be on the alert. The collector was disappointed. This was what happened when animals gained unrefined intelligence. They lost touch with their most basic instincts, the very same primal instincts that had let them live and evolve to what they were now. It was only mercy to end their paltry evolutionary lines and make them part of something far bigger, far worthier. The collector knelt by one of the sleeping goblins. It rustled a little, perhaps sensing its impending doom, but instead of waking up in alert, it rolled over on its stomach, snoring and snorting. The collector decapitated the goblin with one clean swipe of its clawed hand. Blood spurted from the goblin's empty neck, spattering onto a companion sleeping nearby. This other goblin woke up, rubbing its eyes. They glowed yellow in the dark, but with how wide they became, the glow accentuated his utter terror. "Monster! Monster!" shouted the goblin, scrambling up. The collector punched its claws into the goblin's stomach and expanded its fingers from within, slicing the creature in two. By now all the goblins had roused from sleep and started screaming a symphony of terror and alarm. One brave goblin attempted to bite at the collector's leg but instead shattered its teeth on blackened carapace. The collector raised its foot and squashed the goblin, grinding the creature's skull under its heel. The goblins, their eyes adapted to darkness, saw everything clearly, and knew at a deeply fundamental level that every ounce of their instincts screamed at them, telling them that they had no chance against this monstrous intruder. "Drafk! Drafk!" they shouted in unison. With mass hysteria gripping them, they collectively moved further into the cavern, into a secondary, smaller chamber. The collector took its time, following them with slow, almost lazy steps. It did not have to waste energy after all. The goblins had no way to escape. No way to fight back. Where Drafk? The goblins looked around in confusion. The collector also looked. This cavern was cozier than the one before. There was a semblance of privacy to it with a curtain of leaves and branches. Behind it, instead of cold hard earth for bedding, there was a rug of sufficiently complicated embroidery to indicate construction from a more advanced species with a basket filled with fruit by it. Drafk's quarters, presumably. "I killed Drafk," said the collector with newfound vocal cords. Its voice was deep and raspy, a clicking undertone emphasizing its every word with an unnatural, skin-crawling intonation. The side effects of producing vocal cords mixed with insectoid genetic material. "I butchered him wholesale at his watering hole. There is nothing left of him now. But none of you should feel any sorrow for his passing. He has become something more now, serving a purpose far nobler than what his simple-minded brutishness could have ever hoped to conceptualize." The collector neared the goblins, and they withdrew even further, huddling together and shaking in fear. "You strong. You Drafk now," said one of the goblins. "You Drafk. You Drafk," repeated the others. "I am Drafk," said the collector. It knelt on the ground to look the goblins in the eye, almost as if it was talking to children. "What does that mean, little creatures? Drafk is dead. I slew him personally. Consumed his flesh. Devoured his bones. Left not even an errant drop of blood staining the grass." The collector was no fool. Although it would have liked to simply annihilate all these goblins and consume them, if it could, it would still try to obtain some information from them for memory extraction through consumption, especially with more intelligent species such as this goblin, was limited. Until the collector was at the height of its power, it was still in a strange, unknown world of potential dangers, and every bit of information mattered. Chapter 7, Goblin Nest Hunt 2. Thus, the collector realized it would have to make more thorough use of language to extract information, though it had to admit that it did not like trying to navigate the nuances of tinkering speech and its decorum. These goblins were simple-minded and likely, their speech patterns too would be equally predictable, but having to engage with even slightly more advanced tinkerers such as humans to know when they lied or hid the truth would be a challenge it had never encountered before. None others of its kind before it had had any experience attempting to communicate with tinkering species, for either they raised them all or succumbed to their weapons. The very concept of parleying was unthinkable. Destroy or be destroyed was all the collector had known. Obvious, really, a straightforward evolution of the primary directive imbued in all life: consume or be consumed. Certainly, there did exist other collector strains such as the infector or dominator variants that specialized in creating spores, parasites, and symbiotes focused on taking over a world through disease and manipulation, but unfortunately, the current collector, cut off from the greater database system of the collective, could not regrow any adaptations from other collector strains. It was limited to restoring its own warrior-type strain abilities, and though those adaptations were certainly fearsome and exceedingly diverse, there was precious little in the means of enslaving and bending wills. To be sure, consuming the goblins to gain their memories was also possible, but the collector needed keywords about things it wanted to know first for that to be effective, and interrogating these goblins enough might give the collector some idea of what to search for. Optimally, it would be best to communicate and learn many things from the goblins instead of consuming them and learning only about one topic. Provided, of course, these addlepated primitives could even engage in meaningful discourse. Drafk means strong, very strong. Strong one. You are strong one. Draft mean you leader. We follow. You draft. You draft. The collector remained motionless. It would seem that draft was not a name, but a title of leadership. It was amused that these lowly life forms wished to follow it, but it could see that this was simply a desperate plea for their lives. The greatest honor the collector could grant these primitives was to absorb them, placing their genetic material into the collective database where they would be immortalized. But for now, the collector humored them, using its newfound position of authority to ask about what it was most curious about. Tell me, since I am leader of your pack now, do you know of humans? The goblins jumped up and down, excited to be able to tell the collector of things they knew about, hoping that by being useful, they could save themselves. Humans tall and mean. They kill us, so we kill them. Take food and women, said a goblin. Many, many humans. They outside jungle. We want kill them, said another. Humans outside forest weak. We hungry, so we take from them. Here, here, said a goblin from behind the crowd. It grunted and heaved. Here human we capture. The goblin crowd parted, and one of them pushed forwards a limp humanoid. The collector analyzed it. Judging from the memories it had absorbed from the hobgoblin, this was a female of the human species. She was curled up in a ball, shivering with her unprotected body bare to the distressingly cold environment of the den. She was bloody and bruised, her auburn hair torn in many places. The collector clicked its mandibles in ponderance. An equivalent of muttering a hum or I see. If you want, you use, said one of the goblins. The other goblins nodded in agreement. Use? The collector asked. It pressed one of its claws gently on the human's arm. The skin easily yielded to the monomolecular edges of the claw and started to bleed. There was nothing exceptional about this specimen. In many ways, it was very much like the humans it had known, comprised of weak and imperfect flesh and blood, but this specimen was even weaker. She did not even possess any of the genetic enhancements and bodily implants that made the spacefaring humans it was familiar with just a bit sturdier than what their enfeebled, evolutionary stunted flesh and blood bodies would allow for. Perhaps the collector had worried about these so-called humans for nothing. It was becoming increasingly likely that the humans of this world were a divergent but similar evolution of bipedal species. Such similar evolutionary paths were not unheard of after all, especially among tinkerers that all tended to evolve similarly. Make babies. Feel good, said the goblins. Ah, procreation, said the collector. It had no need to procreate. Reproduction as these primitive species understood it was a highly impractical and inefficient process that paled in comparison to the collective's process of assimilation and pure creation. Sex was useless to the collector. It was immune to unnecessary and exploitable instincts such as the drive to reproduce. Pro-minus? Asked the goblins, confused at the difficult word. Interesting. The collector stood up. Your language is sufficiently complex, and yet all of you are too simple-minded to utilize it fully. Curious. Perhaps there are more intelligent subspecies of yourselves roaming about. I assume they will be far more useful than you. The goblins looked at each other, trying to see if one of them had understood what the collector meant. Do not worry yourselves over my rambling, said the collector. You will not have to worry at all anymore. The goblin sighed in relief. Your intelligence is too lacking for me to gain information through conversation. Your lack of neural complexity and adequate grasp over communicative language will be a time-consuming challenge to navigate that I would rather not endure. Consumption will tell me more than your primitive babbling. The collector slashed forwards, taking wide, arcing swings with its deadly claws extended. It was a slaughter. Each swipe cleaved multiple goblins into multiple pieces, their body parts flying in the air and their blood splattering everywhere. The goblins screamed, each swipe thinning their numbers and lowering the volume of their collective cries, but one had the wits to remain calm and dart through the collector's legs and attempt escape. The collector did not pay heed to it. It would find no way out. The collector retracted its claws. Blood had made its entire body slick and reeking of iron. It opened up its pores, draining the liquid biomass into its skin. The blood faded almost immediately, sinking into the collector's hungry cells. There was now the matter of the human. The collector grabbed her head in its palm and shook her ever so slightly. The human shivered. Goblin blood had drenched her, painting her pale skin red. Human, said the collector in the goblin's language. Please, the human whispered. The collector could not understand the human's weak vocalization. It was evident the human did not speak the language of the goblins, nor did it speak the language of the humans that the collector was familiar with. "Save me, adventurer, save me," said the human in a weak voice no louder than a whisper. Her eyes were glazed over, her breathing shallow and cracked, straining against cracked ribs and internal bleeding. The collector sensed the human's vitals and registered a slowing heartbeat and internal hemorrhaging that had forced her into a state of delirious shock. She would be useless for providing information and soon to die anyway. With a quick jab, the collector stabbed its hand into the female's heart, ending her life in a merciful instant. The collector set about consuming everything it could in that den, devouring all the dismembered goblin bodies, the human female and the lone goblin that had attempted to escape only to find itself ensnared by webbing. Biomass gained plus 25. Biomass level 25 100ths. Disappointing. The goblins provided a meager 1 point of biomass at this point and the human a pitiful 5. However, this was to be expected. Higher levels of metamorphosis required exponentially higher levels of complex biomass after all. More useful, however, were the memories and knowledge. Chapter 8, Human Hunt I. The collector observed the webbing it had drawn up over the den. There were bloody stains on it from the goblin that had been trapped there in a final attempt to escape. The collector ran its hands and arachnid limbs across the stains, absorbing the blood through its skin. The last drops of red draining into the collector's integumentary system heralded the complete assimilation of all noteworthy living beings inside the den. The collector's next target was to scope out the more intelligent civilizations on this planet, and though it reasoned that the humans were highly primitive and not a threat, it still had not made any extensive contact with them. For there was still the matter of that thing that had reduced the collector's once mighty state into its current, pitiful form. Was it the creation of these lowly humans? No, it did not seem so. Then another civilization? And yet, there were no signs of any such advanced tinkering race. That left the collector only with the lead of finding information about humans, for it seemed the goblins had no other contact with more intelligent species. Thus it had extracted all the information it could about a nearby human settlement from the goblins. From the goblins' memories, it would seem that they, under the leadership of the hobgoblin, were intending on rallying their forces, calling from other dens further in the forest, and overrunning the village for their supplies and females. They did not normally clash with the militarily superior humans, but necessity drove them due to the presence of a fierce predator deeper within the forest that pushed them out. The exact nature of this predator was unknown. It would require further investigation on part of the collector. There were more hobgoblins as well, and they made better use of their mental faculties than their average goblin brethren, sending them out to scout the human settlement. A few of the goblins in the den had been part of these scouting missions, and from their memories tied to the keyword of human, the collector perceived in greater clarity the nature of the humans in this world. The humans of the settlement were at the very early stages of development as a tinkering civilization, just past the stage when they were hunter-gatherers to cultivating the land, living off of harvests instead of migratory hunts. There was some semblance of hierarchy and division of labor among the humans, with there being an appointed leader and various laborers, farmers, gatherers, hunters, and warriors. Their level of technology was, as predicted, low. They worked with pliable plant matter such as wood, building homes and tools with the substance. They had some measure of metalworking, but they did not have the technological means to produce refined alloys, let alone infinitely complicated alloys such as smart steel. In fact, there simply was no complicated or advanced technology to speak of. Though these humans utilized tools, they still merely utilized them as an extension of their basic bodily strength, not relying on engines or artificial intelligences or anything that remotely reached that caliber of tinkering. There was one thing that confused the collector, however. It was the presence of a substance called magic. One of the goblins had a vivid memory of it. A robed human waving its hands and unleashing a torrent of flame from seemingly nowhere. The collector had searched its memory banks long and hard for any technology that the collective might have encountered that was similar, but in all instances where tinkering species created fire, it was through the aid of devices. To simply wave one's extremities and generate flames was not recorded. Certainly, the collector itself knew of an adaptation that involved igniting a chemical solution with a friction-inducing organ to generate gouts of flame hot enough to melt even smart steel, but the human from the memory did not have anything resembling such an adaptation. Some humans underwent significant bodily changes and artificial adaptations themselves, padding their skeletal and muscular systems with alloys and wiring and plating and whatever else they needed to compensate for their inherent weakness, and among some of these false adaptations was a flame-generating structure in the palm. But this was not that either. Perhaps, had the collector been connected to the collective and its much broader database, then it could have found more relevant information, but for now, it would have to figure out this magic by itself. As of now, it was not particularly worried. If this magic only had the power to generate fire, then it was useless. Regular fire and its temperatures, especially in this atmosphere, would prove to be nothing of a threat to the collector's current level of organic hyperalloy carapace. The collector decided it would head to the human settlement the goblins had planned to attack for more information. It lay an hour run due south from the den, but it would wait around the settlement outskirts until night came to conduct its hunting and investigations. The problem with tinkering species and one of the traits that allowed them to surpass the limitations of nature was that they were social, sticking closely together and grouping their efforts when needed. The collector could not recklessly hunt down humans without expecting some form of group retribution. Thus, it would prowl at night, capturing and interrogating lone humans. It would not be odd for these weaklings to have members of their society disappear due to a forest predator or even goblins. In the time between capturing humans, it would see to investigating the other hobgoblins as well, consuming them for efficient biomass harvesting and, perhaps, as additional sources of information. But for now, the humans posed the greatest potential threat as an intelligent species, and so the collector would focus on obtaining information about them. The collector had already used its consumption memory extraction to learn the human language from the human specimen in the den, meaning it would require more humans to learn of additional topics. The acquisition of the human language, also known as Terran, also gave further credence to the collector's hypothesis that these were not the humans it knew. Their language was utterly different. Similar in some faint ways, but only in a capacity to confirm that their evolutionary developments were similar, requiring similar vocalizing structures to utter the intonations required for the language. Good. Then the collector would not have to worry about the presence of armored vehicles or autonomous weapons systems or seeker drones and the like. Though the collector craved battle and consumption, it recognized that there was never such a thing as too much information. The only issue was now how to approach the humans for it. The collector only knew of one way, and it was simple, really. The collector would appeal to the base, primal instincts that the humans still had embedded within them. The fear of death. It would interrogate them, threatening their demise, and if that proved useless, then it would not hesitate to consume them. With a plan in mind, the collector used its claws to tear down the webbing at the den's entrance. The blood-soaked silk wafted gently to the ground, letting in rays of light once more. With a swift motion, it hoisted itself up and over the den's entrance and onto the forest floor. There, a surprise awaited. A welcome surprise in light of all the thinking the collector had done. Humans. 3 of them. 2 males and 1 female. 2 of them were grouped together standing a few meters away from the collector, while another, the female, stood further back. The collector emitted a low growl in instinctive response to the sense and body language the humans emitted. It could smell their aggression and fear, the sweat forming on their foreheads, the stench of adrenaline starting to reek from within their bodies. It extended its claws until they were like small daggers, the maximal length rank one of monomolecular claws could create. Its antennae stood up straight and alert, sensing every single minute movement from the humans. What in the name of Etheria is this? The hobgoblin? A variant, maybe? Said one of the humans. The collector conducted a sweeping and quick analysis. The human was male, judging by sexually dimorphic traits such as its whiter build, facial hair, and vocal intonations. He wielded what the collector identified as a sword, made of steel, a basic iron alloy. Good musculature. Tall and proportionally built. Garbed in hardened animal skins that protected his vitals. Movements rigid with alarm but relaxed enough to fight if needed. Perhaps your eyes would benefit from a trip to the temple if you mistake this thing as anything resembling a goblin, said his companion. Another male. He was shorter, but more muscled. He wore metal armor all over his body with a plated, interlocked thickness that far surpassed the protection the other male wore. Wielded what the collector identified as a spear, extending the male's damaging reach significantly. But this is the hobgoblin's den. According to the contract's details, that is, but gods know that the average farmer and frontier bumpkin cannot distinguish a goblin from a demon, said the sword-wielding male. Gunther, stay in front of me and try and see if the thing's aggressive. Feeling a little cowardly, are we, Dale? Said the spear-wielder. He inched forwards, spear extended. You know as an adventurer that there's nothing I love more in this world than tearing apart a rare monster. We'll be paid handsomely by the sorcerer's order for anything new their grubby old hands can experiment on, said the sword wielder, bearing a toothy smile. He stood behind the spear wielder and spoke words of caution. If only us 1-stars got to keep the course. But can't complain about coin either. The sword-wielding male known as Dale jutted his chin. Forward, signaling the shorter male, Gunther, forward. But we won't be enjoying our coin as corpses, and you're the one wearing full plate. Stay forwards. Soak the damage. And don't forget, said the female in the back. She grasped with both hands a stick that lengthwise ran approximately equal to her height. The collector did not see any sharpened tip or metal point like with the spear, nor had the wood been tempered any to harden it as a sufficient bludgeoning weapon. It did not understand the purpose of the tool, but if it posed no threat, it did not care. Even though I have your backs with my healing, it does not mean you two are as invincible as you would like to think, said the woman. I do not sense any mana from the monster, but you two still should not let your guards down. Gunther nodded. Yeah, I can't count how many times I would have been dead without you. What say you to a round of drinks afterwards? Token of my appreciation, you know. Plus, I know a pretty nice place back in town. Gods know I won't have any of the filthy swill that the village tavern can dredge up. Flirting on the job again, are we? Said Dale as he circled the collector, sword glinting under the sun. No, just raised with the know-how to tree a lady when I see one, replied Gunther. More like harass one, said Dale. And you wonder why we never can seem to have women stay in our party. The collector observed the humans' exchange with some interest. They seemed to be a highly social species, communicating with each other well. Their language was complex, more so than that of the goblins, and it seemed that even the average member of the species had adequate mastery over it. Their ideas were of a relative higher order, capable of tactical planning under pressure. At a first glance, it would seem they would be good to interrogate. At the least, they would be more articulate than the goblins. Humans, said the collector. All the humans froze. Chapter 9, Human Hunt 2. All the humans froze. It talks, said the woman. The thing talks. The Terran tongue, too. Quiet, B, said Dale. Intelligent monsters shouldn't be insulted. They can be reasoned with. Gunther, back off. Gunther hesitantly withdrew from the collector, but his spear was still raised. What is your name, good creature? Asked Dale. I require no such thing as a name, said the collector. Names are weakness. They signify individuality. The collective is all that truly matters. Dale nodded slowly. I see. Then, good monster minus. Neither am I monster, replied the collector. I sense that in this language, monster connotes a being of inferiority and savagery. However, I am evolutionarily far beyond your primitive kind. A mere monster dares to lord over us, said Gunther. The collector sensed heightened aggression. It stretched out its claws. Quiet, Gunther, you bumbling oaf, said Dale. My apologies, good creature, he said to the collector. We only wish to know why you are here. You see, we were tasked with exterminating the goblins in this very den. They are gone. I have consumed all of them, said the collector. The hobgoblin too? Asked Dale. The larger variant of the species too. Then we have no quarrel with you, good creature, said Dale. We are merely curious as to where you are going from here. A settlement of your kind due south of here. Gunther grasped his spear in both hands. Enough. We are adventurers. We slay monsters, not parley with them. This beast has made its intentions clear. It wishes to lay waste to a village. What more must we hear? Gunther, wait, you impulsive fool! Shouted Dale, but it was too late. Gunther roared as he sprinted, thrusting the spear outwards to the collector's stomach. The collector did not react. It had assessed the tensile durability of the weapon and determined it held zero threat. An object of mere wood and soft metal would do nothing. The spear thumped on the collector's hardened carapace, sliding off of it and screeching out sparks. Gunther cried out in surprise as he slipped forwards. He had not expected the spear to simply slide off the collector's armor, and his reckless forward momentum, so abruptly halted, ruined his balance. Strangely, the collector had miscalculated. The strength of the spear and its sharpness were a good bit beyond what its material qualities would suggest, managing to carve out a small chunk in its carapace. Odd. But no matter. The collector grabbed Gunther's helmeted head in its hand. At 2.5 meters of raw muscle, The collector's hand was large enough to wrap around Gunther's helmet and keep it in a vice-like grip. The collector raised Gunther off the ground with ease. The human flailed, kicking uselessly at the collector. "B. Spell. Cast a spell," shouted Dale. B hastily aimed her staff the collector and began chanting. Too late. The collector crushed Gunther's helmet like a tin can, turning the soft head within into complete mush. Blood and brains flowed from its fingertips, dripping on the grass. It tossed Gunther's limp body aside. It would have liked to question this human, but its aggression proved to be too much. The other humans, however, seemed more open to negotiation. The collector began walking forwards with slow steps. "Let loose the sparks of chaos." "Fireball!" shouted B as she pointed the stick at the collector. Sparks whirled around the tip of the stick for a second before coalescing into a ball of fire that ejected forwards. The collector stuck out its arm and blocked the fireball. It exploded violently, bursting out a torrent of thick flame that momentarily blotted out the collector's figure in an orange blaze. "Fuck!" shouted Dale. He pointed at Gunther's body, still twitching, and said to B, "Heal him. Quick." B bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes. You know I can't heal something like that." Dale roared in rage, stomping the ground. "Gods above," he said. "This was supposed to be easy. A quest for goblins," they said. "Those fucking villagers." "What was that?" said the collector as it emerged from the pillar of flame burning behind it. Fires licked its whole body, but they were growing smaller by the moment, unable to burn a single inch of the collector's durable form. "You, female human, how did you generate this fire?" "The explosive force. I do not see a flamethrower on you, nor any combustion engine to speak of, no hum or electrical charge of machinery. And the language you spoke just now. That language, is that not the tongue of the humans in the United Front? Tell me. How do you know of it?" It began walking towards the female. Dale stepped in, sword drawn. "No, you don't, you damned monster. You tinkering species are so unpredictable. First, you extend me pleasantries, and just seconds later, you are pure aggression. Did you not see that your fellow human attacked me first? I allow you to strike me not only to show your weakness, but to show that it is in defense that I strike back." The collector waved the human male away impatiently. "Move. I have no use for you, and your biomass will provide me little. I must question the female." "Over my bloody corpse," said Dale through gritted teeth. "If that is what you desire. First, the hobgoblin, and now you. Why is it that you simplistic tinkerers wish so strongly for death? Did your evolutionary foray into higher order thinking erase your basic survival instincts?" Dale rushed into the collector, aiming up and slashing at the collector's head. The collector's antennae twitched as it sensed the attack almost before it happened, the sensitive hairs knowing how each and every single one of the human's muscles were twitching and how they would propel, calculating the exact trajectory and arc of its swing. It tilted its head back ever so slightly and caught the blade between its mandibles. Dale heaved as he tried to get his blade back, but the collector's grip was too tight. The collector exerted force in its mandibles and split the blade into two with a sharp crack of metal. "You are useless. Not a threat, nor are you open to giving me any information." The collector spit the blade from its mandibles and swiped at the male's head, slicing it into 5 neat chunks. One of the chunks still held Dale's eyes, still screwed in an angry expression as it landed onto the ground with a bloody squelch. Had these humans fought the collector when it was at its previous metamorphosis level, then they would have defeated it. They were actually surprisingly fast and strong, more so than their simple musculatures and builds would indicate, but not to the point they challenged the collector. They would not even have individually been able to beat Draft, though as a group they certainly could have, especially with the fire-creating capabilities of the female specimen. But now, to the collector, having consumed and far surpassed Draft, they were weak. Nothing but creatures that the collector would either ask or beat information out from, whichever was more efficient. "Now, for my questions," said the collector as it stepped over the male corpse, towards the female. B pointed her staff at the collector again. "Fireball." Another fireball emerged, hitting the collector straight on. Once more, the collector walked past the blazing inferno, now much closer to the female. "Do not run, human," said the collector. "Your leg muscles are weak. Your adrenaline will pass, and then the buildup of waste. Chemicals from anaerobic respiration will slow you to a halt. My musculature, on the other hand, produces no chemicals that hinder its movement. Its ultrafibers possess an efficiency that has been honed through genetic advancements sourced from countless species far stronger, faster, and better than you. Any attempt at escape will only prolong your suffering. The collector was now right in front of the female, towering over her. It was almost twice her size. She shivered in fright. "Tell me, human," said the collector. "Was it magic you utilized just now?" The female dropped her staff and clutched at a pendant around her neck. "I will never give up the secrets of the order, beast," she said weakly. The collector bent over, its mandibles grazing her soft, yielding neck. She was pale with fright and shaking so hard her teeth could be heard chattering. "I am merely asking for information." "You tinkering species value sharing information?" "No. I pledge myself to the order, and so shall order come to be. I pledge myself against chaos, and so shall order come to be. I pledge myself to the realms of life, and so shall order come to be." "What are you saying, human?" said the collector. "These words, they mean nothing to me." "Explain." "I pledge myself to the order," said B, her eyes wild with fear. She chanted out the one thing that gave some small measure of comfort to her fear-riddled mind, the oath she had taken to join the Order of Sorcerers. The collector stopped her, grasping its index and thumb fingers around her neck. "Your pulse is dangerously high. Your vitals are out of control. You are in shock, babbling nonsense. It will take for too long to question information out of you. I do not have time for this. Perhaps I should reassess how I approach your kind for information. But for now, minus." The collector crushed her neck and tossed her away, by the corpses of her two companions to line them up for easier consumption. Consumption will do. Chapter 10, Contemplation and Planning. The collector started with the woman, knowing that she had the most direct experience with this phenomenon known as magic. After all, she had utilized it herself, spitting out balls of flame that, though useless, had mechanisms of functioning that entirely eluded the collector. It inspected the woman's corpse, her attire, and the stick she held, and confirmed to itself that there was nothing anomalous about any of it. The female specimen did not utilize any tools of noteworthy advancement. Her clothes were comprised of a weave of soft plant fibers that did not even provide the pithy protection her male brethren wore with their clunky metal and animal skin paddings. And the stick. The collector knelt down and picked up the stick, eyeing it from top to bottom. A simple stick of wood. Its many gleaming yellow compound eyes noted tiny inscriptions lining the stick, but this written language's meaning eluded the collector. Was it possible then that another civilization had crafted this tool? This fire-creating weapon that seemed intrinsically linked to magic? And why was it that this magic seemed to be tied to the utterance of the language of the spacefaring human variant? Was it perhaps that magic was technology passed from the spacefaring humans to this more primitive variant? The mere presence of that language gave the collector a cause for concern. It scrapped its previous hypothesis that the humans of this world were a divergent but similar evolution entirely separate from the spacefaring humans. Not to mention that with the presence of the language, there arose again caution for the presence of the spacefaring humans themselves, and they were a dangerous threat the collector could never surpass in its current state. Yet, nothing would indicate that the spacefaring humans had any presence here aside from the utterance of their language. The collector had already reasoned that through with the complete absence of signs of advanced civilization upon this planet. The most likely conclusion the collector reached was that the humans of this world were a subspecies split off from the main spacefaring group of humans. The collector knew that the spacefaring humans had experienced an era of interstellar colonizing, and that some of these colonies were lost when warp technology was yet new and unstable. It was entirely possible that this world held humans that had degenerated in advancement from the original spacefarers once they were cut off from the main body of the species and their support. This would explain how far away this world was, far enough such that the collector could not establish any connection with the collective, for a faulty warp was easily capable of sending errant groups of humans to the far-flung edges of space. Yet that still did not explain this magic and how it did not match any technology profile that the collector had in its memory bank. The collector bit down on the stick, chewing and swallowing the wood, but found that there was nothing useful about it. As the collector had expected, it was simply wood. Simple plant matter just as mundane and of the same nature as that comprising the countless trees surrounding it. Useless even for gaining a point of biomass. The collector threw the stick away in disappointment, though it did note that a tinge of warmth pricked the collector's stomach as it digested the wood. The nature of the warmth eluded the collector also, as it was unlike it to face any kind of biological reaction to consumption, its innards and digestive fluids bioengineered to fend against any manner of toxin known throughout the cosmos. Odd. Was this also tied to magic? The collector would know once it consumed the female specimen. It picked the female's corpse up in one hand, its thick hand wrapping around her slim waist almost entirely. It opened its jaw and mandibles grotesquely wide, its jaw bones unhinging and its mouth muscles contracting, and shoveled the female's form into its throat, and within a single second, she was gone, flesh and blood and bones and all. It was as if she had never existed at all. Biomass gained plus 10. Biomass level 35/100ths. The collector cocked its head in muted surprise. Unlike the other human female specimen from within the goblin den that provided a measly 5 biomass points, this one provided 10. Yet the female herself possessed nothing different about her. Searching her genetic code found no aberrations or mutations that set her aside from her brethren. Where did the additional biomass come from? And strangely, that warm feeling permeating throughout the collector's being from consuming the stick now intensified as the female was broken down, though it did not develop into anything that caused discomfort. Too many questions. The collector would find answers soon enough by searching the female specimen's memories before the short time frame in which her memories were accessible after consumption expired. It stood still as its mind focused on the keyword of magic. The collector's mind blanked out, and it temporarily saw a flash of white and heard a dull, droning buzz hum in its auditory systems, signs that indicated a failure to extract memories. Why? The collector knew only of 2 instances where it could not extract any memories at all. 1. The consumed species was far too intellectually and evolutionarily complex. This was unlikely to a probability greatly hugging at 0. The human was indeed a relatively intelligent species. And the collector's processing power was dampened from being severed from the collective, but the human was not nearly evolved as either a species or potentially aberrant individual to hamper the collector. She was just as primitive as the rest of her kind, ruled by an unnatural mixture of budding but underdeveloped higher thought and base instincts. 2. The consumed species held a psionic connection to a far greater whole that could create a mental structure complex enough to resist extraction. In essence, the very same mind-to-matter mechanism that linked the collector to the greater hive mind of the collective. This did not seem likely, and yet, it was more likely than the first. The collector did not waste any time on doubt. It settled on this explanation and immediately geared its mind towards the potential threats this hypothesis would generate. There was one tinkering species known as the Claxia that the collector knew of that did possess the rare adaptation to produce psionic links, but they were weak ones that only linked their thoughts and emotions to each other among small groups. Not at all on the level of the collective hive mind that could unite billions of life forms into a greater, perfected whole. No, it was a grave insult to even begin to compare the two. The collective hive mind was an evolutionary marvel that developed alone and unique in its sheer scale and complexity among countless star systems. The probability that anything similar had developed here, especially with these primitive humans, was exceedingly low. But it was possible that potentially this subspecies of human did possess psionic links with each other, and if enough were linked together, it could comprise a mental body sufficiently complicated enough to repel the collector's individual extraction effort. The collector hastened its movements. That meant that there was potential that other humans, particularly those in the nearby settlement, were linked to this human, and that meant they might already be raising an alarm against the collector. The collector quickly consumed the 2 males. Again, there was nothing of note worth on their bodies. The only commonality that existed among all 3 humans was the presence of a patch on their clothing that had a rudimentary weave representing the crude visage of a single star. What that meant, the collector did not know, though it did recall one of the males referring to the group as a whole as 1 stars. Possibly a term of classification that indicated humans that were genetically connected, for again, as with the magic familiar female the collector consumed, these males had memories it could not extract. Further investigation was needed. Biomass gained, 20. Biomass level, 55/100ths. Genetic material gained. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Frost boar. Again, these 2 males provided double the amount of biomass as the female specimen in the den. The animal skins that one of the males wore also provided the genetic material for a species known as a frost boar as well. The collector clicked its mandibles. The frost boar possessed a thick layer of blubber and insulating skin that would provide strong resistance to the cold. Useful. and an indicator that these humans were widespread across this world, for the male could not have obtained the frostboar's hide without a significant degree of travel or trade pre-established by the human species as a whole. As it thought to itself, the collector moved, wasting not a single moment of time. It sprinted out of the dense clearing and into the woods, shrinking its muscles so that it could weave across thickets of tree trunks with graceful agility. Its compound eyes, ultra-sensitive hairs, quick mind, and untiring musculature meant that it could cross through the heavily forested woods with a speed that made it almost seem that there was nothing blocking its way. It headed north, deeper into the forest and away from the settlement, for it had changed its mind. It would not near the human settlement now, not when there was the possibility that the humans had raised an alarm. No, it instead utilized the few bits of dialogue and memories it extracted from the goblins to head towards their other nests where there would be more hobgoblins that were part of the plan to overrun the human settlement. The collector mapped out the approximate locations of a total of 5 more hobgoblins spread across 5 more dens that would provide an enticing amount of biomass. The collector ran a quick calculation. 5 hobgoblins, if they were similar to Drafk, plus a number of goblins to accompany each, would provide easily enough biomass to reach its 4th level of metamorphosis. The collector clicked its mandibles in anticipation as it leapt across a bush, swerving its body so that it slipped past 2 tree trunks before resuming its quick sprint. Even with how quick it was, it created little to no sound, every single one of its many steps carefully calculated and placed in spots with the least dead and dried foliage to minimize sound. Once it reached the 5th level of metamorphosis, it could begin to keep single adaptations it harvested from creatures native to this world even if the collector discarded their forms. It would also be able to increase the number of genetic samples it could splice together to create a new form from 3 to 4. Not to mention that if the humans had raised an alarm, then the collector had to become stronger to face them. It was confident that if the humans it had just consumed were the extent of threat that the humans could muster up at their primitive level of technology in this world, then even in its current state, it could annihilate dozens of them with utter ease. But it erred on the side of caution, for it knew the humans could breed and populate and gather themselves in even greater numbers like the swarms of pests they were. ________________________ Status recap. Metamorphosis level 2. Biomass level, 55/100ths. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Frostdwar. Current adaptations. Ultrafiber muscles rank 3. Sensitive hairs rank 2. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 2. Monomolecular claws rank 1. Current form. Black hobgoblin striped centipede jungle spider. Chapter 11, Hobgoblin Massacre. The collector spent a good hour sprinting through the woods, its sensitive hair adaptation picking up any changes in temperature and wind current around it to ensure that nothing escaped its spatial awareness. Small animals, mostly mammalians of little worth such as the rabbit it had consumed before, made way for the collector's charging yet deathly silent figure, scampering into burrows or deep undergrowth like retainers parting in fear-fueled hurry before the descent of an almighty tyrant. Good. That meant that the collector was not wasting its time. It would seem that the best sources of biomass in this forest biosphere would be the goblins, more specifically the larger hobgoblin variants. The collector knew that in terms of spatial orientation, the goblin den it had consumed was the one furthest positioned south, closest in proximity to the human settlement. The other 4 were more remote, with 2 of them located in what seemed to be a darker, harsher part of the forest biome located far north. The memories the collector extracted were hazy, sufficient enough to map out where it needed to go but not clear enough for it to be completely confident of what it would face. It could recall distinct emotions of fear and wariness from both the hobgoblin and the goblins it had consumed when they roamed the darker zone of the forest, but nothing in detail as to what exactly they faced. The northern part of this forest biome might house hobgoblin variants that were even stronger than the draft the collector faced. It seemed likely, in fact, if these northern hobgoblins were adapted to a suitably harsher environment. The collector clicked its mandibles as it slowed down, sensing that it neared the approximate location of the second den it would consume. This den, however, still sat within the warmer zone of the forest, just a small distance north of where the collector had initially crash-landed. It stood to reason then that the hobgoblin here would be of the same variant as the draft the collector had already consumed, indicating that there would be no threat. Yet the collector still moved with caution. By now, its once breakneck sprint had eased down into a sauntering walk focused on complete obscuration of presence. Each of its steps were soft, evading any breakable debris that could cause sound, and it utilized the thicket of trunks around it to its advantage, hiding its figure behind them as it advanced. The collector's olfactory system alerted its brain. The scent of the goblins was faint here, but sufficiently strong enough to follow. It paid attention to the forest floor, keeping its many bulbous eyes alert for tracks, but did not find any. Equals 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 equals. A minute passed as the collector stalked its way forward. Then it tensed up. The scent of the goblins continued to intensify, but it quickly realized from a minor calculation that the scent was increasing at a rate near double to what it expected, which meant that the goblins were on the move and headed directly towards the collector. It hid behind a tree trunk thick enough to cover its whole frame and waited, keeping all of its vast sensory array alert. All of its internal functions slowed down to a near halt, its heartbeat nearly deadening and its muscles freezing to an absolute stillness, preventing any sound from escaping it. It could not hide in treetops any more as it did in its previous metamorphosis level due to its now significantly increased bulk, but it still had more than enough programmed skill in stalking and hunting to minimize its presence to a level far, far beyond what any evolutionarily backwards hunter was capable of in this world. It did not take long for the goblins to near. The collector sensed that up ahead, 20 meters ahead, an entourage of goblins moved through the forest. They did not care much at all to obscure their presences, obviously believing themselves apex predators in this specific zone of the forest biome. Their footsteps were heavy, crushing apart dead and brittle foliage, and their voices filled the air in conversation. The collector's vibration-sensitive ears were not effective at this range, but its hearing was developed enough for it to calculate that there was one heavier pair of footsteps accompanied by the faster, lighter scampers of 6 other bipeds. An entourage consisting of 1 hobgoblin and 6 goblins. Encounter approximately due in 10 seconds. The collector began to restart its heart, pumping blood back into its body to ready for battle. Its monomolecular blade slowly unsheathed from its fingertips and elbows. Draft, we take village now, right? Said a goblin. Yes. If my brother ready, replied a gruff, deeper voice. The hobgoblin. But be careful. We no move yet. Have to wait for shaman. Then the lord. 5 seconds. How long we wait? Said another goblin. Want to eat? Hungry for days now. I know, Kiri. 2 nights. Just 2 nights, said the hobgoblin, its voice very near now. Then we eat. We take back our land. Make humans pay for stealing. Make Goblin Kingdom again like Lord says. At precisely the mark of 1 second remaining before the hobgoblin would pass the tree trunk the collector hid behind, the collector moved first. It swerved around the trunk in a single sweeping motion, calculating based on motions its sensitive hairs detected where the hobgoblin would be behind the trunk and slashing at the throat. The hobgoblin flashed into the collector's sight, and surprisingly, it managed to move backwards just in the nick of time, evading the claws aiming to shred its jugular by just a hair's breadth. Yet the collector was not so unsophisticated that it would botch a planned attack with any sizable margin of error. Its claws might not have slit the hobgoblin's vital parts into pieces, but it did inflict a deep wound. The hobgoblin stumbled backwards, putting a tawny black hand to its throat where 5 deep lacerations exposed pumping, soft and vulnerable major arteries to the air. Still, the collector did not like that it had managed to err in its calculations. It had done so before with the humans, too, misjudging their speed, strength, and the properties of their weapons. Though in the end its miscalculations were so minor that they did not affect the outcomes of its battles, such sloppiness was unbecoming of the collector. Of the collective and the evolutionary progress it exemplified. As a representative of the collector had to do better. It would prove itself now. What? Said the hobgoblin as it glanced down at its hand. Blood red smeared its black flesh in contrasting hues. It looked up to the collector, a snarl half forming at its mouth, but then its yellowed eyes widened. Brother? Wondered the hobgoblin aloud, and in that moment of hesitation or recognition or whatever it was that made the creature inefficient, the collector acted. The collector thrust its hand out, pointing its spider silk spinneret-topped index finger at the hobgoblin. It contracted its ultrafiber muscles around its finger, and like a spring-loaded coil, a thread of spider silk shot forwards, latching onto the hobgoblin's forehead. The collector grunted as it grabbed the silk thread with its other hand and pushed down violently at just the precise angle to make the hobgoblin face plant with a heavy crash into the forest floor. There was an audible thump of impact as a cloud of decayed sticks and leaves fluttered up around the hobgoblin's head. The forest floor was too soft of a surface to cause lethal injuries, but the sudden blow would daze the hobgoblin for a moment, and a moment was all the collector needed. It leapt forwards and landed by slamming its carapace-encased foot into the hobgoblin's head like a falling sledgehammer, crushing the feeble biped's skull with a sickening, thoroughly audible crunch before the collector twisted its foot, grinding everything soft and vital under its heel. It was then, when their leader, the precious draft, was reduced to nothing but a pulp soup of brain matter mixed with cranial shards, that the goblins reacted with shrieks. The entire altercation must have lasted 3 seconds, if that, and shock had prevented the simple-minded goblins from doing anything in that short time frame. The goblins took a single look at their dead draft, then at the collector's hideous, towering form of musculature and carapace, and turned their backs. No survivors. The collector gleaned from the short conversation between the goblins and the hobgoblin that their forces were mobilizing. Any goblins that escaped would alert the other dens. The collector shot forward another thread of silk, and it latched onto the nearest fleeing goblin's back, and it fell backwards as the string grew taut from its attempted escape. Like reeling an unruly dog in by leash, the collector tugged at the string, sailing the goblin back. The collector grabbed the silk string like a lasso and started to swing it around above its head with the goblin still attached. The velocity of the revolutions was such that the tethered goblin could not even scream, the air sucked out its lungs. The other goblins were running now, and all in different directions. The collector had anticipated this, and there was no better way of dealing with scattering prey than ranged weaponry. Of course, the collector did not possess its acid spitters or spine shooters yet, so it made do with this. Improvisation. It did not like doing anything that remotely resembled tool usage, scornful of the tinkerers and their reliance on tools as they were, but this barely passed its standards. The collector swung down the thread, using the goblin at its end to slam down into another goblin, crushing both into broken and lifeless bodies. It made sure that the impact was not strong enough to completely explode the goblin's body, for it had to be used 4 more times. And 4 more times, the collector used the spider silk tethered goblin corpse as a wrecking ball to bludgeon the rest of its brethren to a broken bone demise before the little things could even dive into cover. The collector cut the spider silk from its finger and breathed in the iron-scented smell of its victory. It felt less rewarding than before, when it was at its previous metamorphosis stage and it had actually felt injury against the other hobgoblin. This was far too easy now. Perhaps the other hobgoblins in the harsher environment of the forest would provide a better challenge for consumption. Chapter 12, Champions and Lords. The collector consumed the spoils of its victory. It swallowed the tiny goblins whole but had to carve up the much larger hobgoblin into pieces. It sliced apart the hobgoblin corpse with the rote and quick efficiency of a seasoned butcher with its claws, not at all interested in savoring the specimen's taste, as the fight it had offered was now beneath the collector, not worthy of respect nor slow tasting. As the collector's digestive system broke down the fresh corpses, it searched their memories utilizing notable keywords that would better uncover the nature of the darker zone of this forest environment. But in specifically searching the hobgoblin's memories, the collector utilized the keyword of lord. The conversation between the overgrown goblin and its lesser kin had not eluded the collector, and it understood the connotation of a lord as an authoritative figure, very likely the leader of these dens. Considering the goblins and their kind followed a societal hierarchy that valued strength and size above all else, the collector surmised that this lord was significantly more powerful than even the hobgoblins. The memories came, and the collector immersed itself into them. Underscore 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 underscore. Grun took tentative steps forward, looking around himself to see nothing but shadows. He could only follow the heavy footsteps in front of him, the steps of the champion. Never before had Grun seen a goblin so big, so wide. He remembered when the champion first showed up. Out of nowhere, almost from the dark side where nobody was ever supposed to go, where light never shone and big monsters were everywhere. At first, Grun thought maybe he had drunk too much of the stolen spicy water from the humans that made him see all fuzzy and gave him headaches afterwards. There were no other hobgoblins here other than Grun and his younger brother Grun. They had all died 10 years ago when the humans killed them and took their land. But the champion was real. Very real. His punches made sure of that. The champion told Grun to swear fealty, and although Grun did not know what that big word meant, he could still understand the intention, the challenge behind it. Grun was mighty, he knew it, mightier than any of the little ones he protected, mightier than Grun, his younger brother. Together, Grun thought he and his brother Grun were the mightiest there were, the strongest of the few survivors left from the human attack 10 years ago, when the strong humans chased everyone away with swords and fire and built their big buildings and moved in their cows over the dens and grasses that once belonged to the goblins. But Grun began to understand he knew nothing. He fought the champion, and the champion beat Grun in just 3 minutes even without the big armor and axe he brought with him. Grun, younger and weaker than Grun, did not do much better either. Now, both of them and the little ones under them were traveling through the dark side. Their elders, back when they were alive, had told them they were never supposed to go to all to meet someone the champion called the Lord. Grun shivered, the first time he had done so in many years. He had lived through 15 cycles of seasons, but never before had he felt such cold before. Never before had he seen such darkness. His eyes could see at night and in the pits, and he often used his good eyes to sneak up on the humans who could not see so well in the dark. But this darkness was nothing like the night. It was so dark Grun could see nothing. Just black. Just shadow. To the point that Grun followed right behind Grun to avoid being lost, putting a hand on his older brother's shoulder to make sure he knew where he was. The little ones did much the same, holding their hands together and huddling around Grun and Grun. "Do not worry," said the raspy voice of the champion. "Light grows thin here, but all is good. I know the path to avoid the spiders. And do not feel bad about losing to me and falling under the Lord. I was like you too once. Young and thought myself mighty. You will learn as you have now with my fists. The Lord is might itself. Under his generosity, you will find new purpose." Grun felt Grun tap his shoulder in questioning, but Grun could only grunt in response, not knowing anything about this Lord, just that he was strong, very strong, if even the champion served him. Minus the memories flickered and moved further minus. Underground. But not in something small and cramped like a den. Something far, far bigger. Grun had seen the likes of it. Sometimes, strong monsters lived in holes like the big worm by the river. But this pit was much bigger than any he had ever seen, hidden away far, far up, deep and deep into the dark place nobody was supposed to go and where nobody did go. "Kneel, hobgoblins, before Lord Zol, last of the royal blood," came a commanding and aged voice. A hunchbacked hobgoblin uttered the command with a flourish of his hand, the rattle of bone bracelets and accessories on his arm and neck accentuating the movement. His dull blue eyes peered through the sockets of a skull helmet, looking at Grun and Grun with cold contempt. When the bone-reed goblin approached, Grun and Grun felt a chill settle in their hearts, forcing them to stare down, to not meet those chilling eyes. The goblin circled the hobgoblin brothers, then grunted. "The natives here are pitiful. Though this one," said the goblin as it tapped Grun's shoulder, "has managed to awaken his roots if even the slightest bit. But that is it. Even as hobgoblins, they are small and brutish. My brethren to the north will provide you far better stock to be your champions, my lord. Quiet yourself, grunt. All goblinkind, no matter how little, how backwards they have become in the centuries I have slumbered, will find a place by my side. How sad a state my people have gone into, our old kingdom once great and tall reduced now to nothing, our people scattered as pests to be hunted down by the humans and their gods. I will break the humans down, bring forth our numbers back once more with their flesh and establish our kingdom once more, and under the great shadow it will cast all of us shall thrive while men and their gods die." Grun knelt down with Grun by his side, knowing by now that they were facing something far bigger than what they were. The little ones knelt behind them and trembled as the echoing waves of the Lord's voice washed over them. "Come, look here, my children," said the Lord. "And know I bring you a chance to prove yourselves. Fight for me and prove your worth. Bring me human skulls. Bring me the lands they have taken from you. Find the dull embers hatred and vengeance in your hearts long forgotten by living in contented sloth and stoke them again." Grun looked up. There was light there. A single source, but just a little bit in so much darkness made Grun want to run over to it, to go under that bit of warmth no matter what it cost. The light came from the Lord. From a big sword in his hand made of shiny metal, the kind that the human adventurers would use. The Lord was a big goblin just like Grun and his brother, but even bigger. Not bigger than the champion, but still, there was something different about the Lord. Something on the Lord's face, his red eyes that shone with power that was equal parts threatening and comforting, Like being beside a raging wildfire on a cold winter's day, one step away from burning or freezing in the dark. And if Grunt had to choose between the cold dark and the terrifying heat in front of him, he would choose the warmth. Underscore 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 underscore. The memories ended. Biomass gained plus 35. Biomass level, 9100s. The collector clicked its mandibles, pleased at the 35 points of biomass the hobgoblin gave. It processed the significance of the hobgoblin's memories, identifying threats within them. The Goblin Champion. A sizable specimen possessing advanced musculature, tusks, white skin, and, curiously, thick protective metal coverings and a large, crushing and slicing weapon of far better craftsmanship and quality than the roughly carved clubs the hobgoblins wielded. The other larger goblin, the one with bones decorating its body, seemed thinner and shorter, about as large as the normal hobgoblins, and yet, the hobgoblins deferred to it. Under what metric, the collector did not know yet. It did not seem that the bone-decorated goblin was a physically superior specimen. Perhaps the hobgoblins deferred to it on basis of age. The Goblin Lord? In bulk, between the size of the hobgoblin and the Goblin Champion, and yet possessing of distinctive authority. Whether that authority sourced itself solely from a strength-based superiority the collector could not confirm, but considering the simple, power-focused nature of the Goblin Society, it seemed likely. However, the Goblin Lord and the other variants in the Dark Zone were more sophisticated than the hobgoblins here, articulating their thoughts and utilizing their language in a much fuller extent. That would indicate a greater probability of higher thinking and tactical acumen. Troublesome. The collector went about extracting other details from the lesser goblins' corpses, such as the location of their den for additional clues, further specifications on the locations of the other goblin dens located in this Dark Zone, the exact nature of threats in the Dark Zone itself, and, finally, more details of this Goblin Champion and Lord. The collector sifted through its thoughts as it moved, heading now to the den of the slaughtered goblins to pick up any additional clues there. It determined it would have to reach the third metamorphosis level before challenging the Darker Zone. Unfortunately, there would not be more goblins, therefore it seemed the vast majority of them had moved to the other den, and those, the collector had already consumed. The collector would have to find another biomass source. From the goblins' memories, aside from the goblins, it knew that the primary predator that lived in the Darker Zone were spiders affected by some gigantification mutation, causing them to become almost as large as humans. Those, coupled with the new threats of this Goblin Champion and, more importantly, Lord, meant the collector had to evolve first before challenging this new environment and its threats. Chapter 13, Frostwar Evolution. With the collector's efficient movements, it reached the den within 30 minutes, and there it found the den much the same in structure to that of the other hobgoblins. Like the previous den, this one too was comprised of a simple system of tunnels made by a specimen much larger than the goblins, and judging now by serrations on rock formations within the den, by a creature that did so with hosts of rotating teeth. Quite likely an annelid-type creature, perhaps the very same as the one the hobgoblin the collector recently digested. This Grun, as he was called, referred to in his memories as a giant worm. Interesting. A brief analysis of the rock formation and the mossy vegetation growing within the den indicated that no such specimen had occupied this area for quite some time, not to mention that the goblins themselves would not take up residence here should there have been a risk of encountering such a creature. A burrowing worm would allow the collector to easily access subterranean movement and vastly enhance them with adaptations of its own. This would be extremely useful in evading detection by the primitive humans of this world that lacked any of the advanced sensor systems that their spacefaring counterparts possessed. It simply needed to track down the worm. Further investigation needed on that end. For now, the collector focused on the case of the goblins, for if they were to mobilize soon, within the span of 1 to 2 days, then the collector had to act quickly. Any significant movement of these goblins clashing with the humans in the southern settlement would generate enormous amounts of attention that the collector did not wish to be dragged into. But at the same time, should the goblins and the humans clash, then the collector would lose its chance to gain easy access to the biomass and genetic samples of the goblins, and though the dull species did not interest the collector before, the discovery of this champion and lord piqued its interest. The collector, like many of its warrior strains, did have a certain degree of embedded personality within it, and unlike the dominator or infector strains, the warrior strains possessed traits that developed from the many predator-type genes that comprised them. Thus, the collector held pride for the fight, for the hunt, and once it set out to hunt a target, it would not easily give up its quarry, especially to lesser specimens such as humans. And perhaps more importantly, the goblins were an advancing force. They would fight, and if they failed, die on human territory. Their genetic samples would be difficult to scavenge there. Massively increased human surveillance and militarized presence throughout the forest was also inevitable in such an outcome. The collector wished for none of those. The forest was a quiet, remote biome that it could handle on its own with its current, weakened capabilities. It could not risk having to flee from this biome, especially if hostile human territory surrounded it or there were only harsher biomes elsewhere. The collector thus searched the den for more information, but after a few minutes of thorough investigation, found nothing anomalous about it. Its layout was almost exactly the same as the other den it had ransacked already, with a general living space for the lesser goblins and a private cavern for the hobgoblin. The only difference lay in the presence of remains in the furthest chamber, where in the other den the goblins kept human captives. Instead of live captives, there were instead 3 skeletons picked clean of flesh and blood, lined up neatly together atop a rough bed of grasses. The collector crouched down by the skeletons and analyzed them. Judging by their proportions, they were human in origin. An oddity. According to the behavioral habits the collector knew from consuming goblins and taking their form, the goblins did not consume bone and threw the bones of their prey out. Usage as a tool, then? No, the collector took up a skeletal arm and crushed it with ease. Too weak. Too brittle to utilize in any meaningful way. Perhaps, as the collector recalled the bone-wearing hobgoblin from Grun's memories, a simple means of gathering accessories for visual differentiation in a rudimentary societal hierarchy. Whatever it was, the collector would not pass up on consuming these skeletons. It passed up on biomass beneath its efforts, such as plants or, now that it was more developed, some of the smaller creatures scurrying about in the lowest grasses of this forest, but human remains were different. There stood the chance that certain human biomass samples were special, providing more than they should. And the collector found that it did not regret its decision as it scarfed down all the remains. Biomass gained +10 star. Biomass level, 100/100. All 3 skeletons were special. A coincidence it could not place significance on yet, but noted in its mind. It could not extract memories from the skeletons. For extraction required fresh biomass from a neural center with sufficient structural integrity that, if expired, had not decayed too significantly. These bones, however, were still rather fresh, splotches of recently dried blood remaining along their skeletal curves. Along with the live captured woman, these human deaths likely provided the reason the humans had sent 3 of their kind against the dens. With the humans further potentially alerted by the collector causing the demise of their scouts, there was the potential that already the humans were readying themselves in greater numbers. Soon enough, if the advance of the greater and much more powerful goblin force in the darker zone was left unchecked, there would be quite the large-scale altercation. The collector would consume the goblins before their movements caused the forest to become too dangerous to inhabit. And to do that, the collector had to evolve. It headed outside of the den and found a secluded patch of taller grass to metamorphose under. The collector could access its 3rd metamorphosis level from consuming the special skeletons, though it would have spent time to hunt other creatures to reach the 3rd level anyway had the skeletons been mundane. The warm feeling in its body had steadily intensified with continued consumptions, and as the collector shrank into the ground, its hulking, muscle-bound figure breaking apart into a cocoon-encased puddle of flesh, it sought not only to adapt itself against the darker zone, but also to try and figure out what this warmth was. Every successive metamorphosis level meant that the cocoon the collector formed became larger, more complex, requiring more space, but for now, it still did not attract much attention, being perhaps 1.5 meters in diameter. Now, with its form broken down and its consciousness spread throughout primordial, pliable ooze capable of bending the raw essence of creation to its will, the collector first inspected the genetic materials it had available. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Frost dwarf. The collector inspected the human material, analyzing it to parse any abnormalities within it that could explain its aberrant levels of biomass. It found nothing. No mutations. No uniquely expressive genes among the special skeletons or female specimen. Further investigation needed on this subject. The collector took to splicing together a new form. It kept its hobgoblin and black spider genes, useful as they had been so far, but it discarded its striped centipede material for that of the frostdor, finally ridding itself of this bipedal form. The metamorphic cocoon housing the collector pulsed and grew, roots of flesh expanding outwards from its perimeter as it expanded, latching onto vegetation and consuming it. Within minutes, an embryo formed from within the liquid-filled, flesh-colored cocoon, visible as a dark nugget through the cocoon's membranous, vein-dotted skin. The embryo grew rapidly, and within minutes, was the size and vague shape of a goblin. A minute later, it was the size of a human. A minute later, the size of a hobgoblin. The collector incorporated the frostwar gene now, and the humanoid-shaped embryo completely altered in shape, morphing in a pulsing, twisting mass before becoming larger, whiter, four-legged. Here, the collector also restored one of its previous adaptations, the pyrocatalytic glands that would allow it to invoke flaming misery upon this oxygen-rich world. It eagerly awaited as its metamorphosis entered its final stages, feeling the coveted glands, the product of evolution the collective had carefully selected over 100 worlds, grow within its half-formed throat. When the collector burst forth from its cocoon, warm, viscous liquid steaming and dripping from its furred form, it found to its satisfaction the feeling of land under 4 stable feet. Yes, this was its structure, the same it had been born with when the collective initially birthed it. Metamorphosis Level 3-4. Biomass Level 100-100-0/100. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Adaptations. Internal systems. Ultrafiber muscles rank 3-4. External systems. Sensitive hairs rank 2-3. Organic hyperalloy carapace rank 2-3. Weapons systems. Monomolecular claws rank 1-2. Pyrocatalytic glands rank 1 new. Current form. Black hobgoblin/frostboar/jungle spider. The collector was as tall as it was before, being about a head taller than a hobgoblin, but were it to stand up on its hind legs, it would tower over any hobgoblin, even the champion from Grun's memories. Ultrafiber musculature rippled in dense coils all around the collector's four-legged, barrel-shaped body, and though the ordinary frostboar would have looked rounder, softer with blubber, the collector looked like a giant chunk of bulging sinews weighing close to half a ton. Much of the cold-resistant blubber from the frostboar had been condensed into marbling and a smaller, thinner layer coating the ultrafiber muscle mostly to maximize total muscle mass and strength for cold alone, unless it reached extreme freezing temperatures, affected the collector little, and the dark zone did not seem to possess temperatures low to that degree. If the collector charged through the forest right now, it had no doubts it would simply smash through trees and rocks alike utterly unimpeded, let alone the fleshy and weak bodies of humans or goblins. 2 massive, curved tusks tipped with monomolecular edges gleamed from its mouth. Thick, coarse light brown bristles and fur lined with ultra-sensitive hairs covered its body, with a particularly shaggy mane growing around its neck. 3 glowing yellow compound eyes along with thick, monomolecular edge-tipped mandibles dotted either side of its elongated, porcine head. And finally, 6 arachnid appendages burst out from its back, each of them tipped with small monomolecular claws, with one of them possessing web-spinning capabilities. The collector could not infinitely manifest certain adaptations or traits. The monomolecular claws, for example, required significant biomass the collector did not yet have, so it could only tip its tusks and mandibles in them. Still, the collector was pleased with its new form. This was far sturdier, stronger, and faster than its previous one. In celebration, it stood on its hind legs, towering high and shaking off the last remnants of the embryonic fluid dripping from its fur, and loosed a controlled jet stream of chemically ignited fire from its mouth as it reclaimed once more one of the many prized adaptations the collective had gifted it with. Now the collector was truly ready to hunt. Chapter 14, The Dark Zone. The collector ran north to the edge of the forest's light zone. By now, it was simply too large to adequately slink around tree trunks, and though it did avoid obstacles when it could, those that it calculated it could not move by, it simply charged through. There was a sense of strength in this action that the collector relished, the feeling of using its body as a bludgeoning gavel to break apart and judge the weakness of this world. It rushed through the thick of the forest like a shooting star of muscle-bound destruction. The heat developing within the collector's being had not settled. Rather, it had intensified upon reaching this next metamorphosis level. Yet this development did not harm the collector. No, it instead made the collector feel. It felt the emotions most strongly programmed within it, the predatory instincts and drive to hunt and to hunger not only for biomass but for battle, for the fight itself, grow in intensity with the heat. Perhaps this heat was a symptom of something that affected its neural centers in some manner, but it could not sense any infections nor even psionic interferences within itself. The collector understood that the current flow of emotions pouring out from its neural systems exceeded the limitations placed by the collective hive mind, and had the collector still been genetically linked to the hive mind, then surely the hive mind would have dampened the collector's mind as it did when tinkering races attempted in rare occasions to genetically infiltrate collector strains. Yet, though this was unnatural against the programmed limits the collective hive mind, the most sacred of authorities, the collector did not mind. So long as these anomalous neural activities did not hinder its directive to hunt and consume, it would place secondary concern for them. Fueled by hunger for battle, the collector sped through the forest. Its top speed exceeded that of its metamorphosis level even with the occasional tree or boulder it had to smash out of the way, especially with 4 legs dedicated to locomotion. There was even a stag it collided with, splattering the unfortunate specimen into an exploded mess of shattered bones and burst organs that split apart around the collector's speeding body, painting it red for a brief moment. The collector did not stop to gather all of the stag's biomass, absorbing only the blood and fleshy pieces stuck to its body from the impact. Biomass gained. +2. Biomass level, 2/100ths. By the time the collector reached the edge of the light zone, the blackened sun's rays had darkened from a golden glimmer to a deep amber, the celestial body beginning to set in the sky. The collector looked down at the very literal edge it stood upon, at a deep ravine filled at the bottom of a near 100-meter drop with a raging river current that separated the collector's side of the forest from the dark zone. The darker zone of this biome was just as enveloped in shadow as it was in the goblins' memories. At first, the collector had thought their memories flawed to a degree, for the darkness in them observed far exceeded any naturally occurring dark. No, the collector noted with its yellow compound eyes, a hoof escaping its fang and tusk-lined mouth, the thick growth of trees in dark zone, wider and taller than those in the lighter zone, were indeed as dark as they were in the memories. The trees did not just block light with their leaves, they absorbed it. Absorption to such an extreme degree that there was nearly an entire absence of visible light, the leaves and bodies of trees so black that their dark outlines stood out sorely against even the faintest shade of color or light. The forest floor, then, would have essentially zero visibility, explaining how even the goblins with their eyes adapted to low visibility environments were blind. There was not enough light even for their sensitive photoreceptors to perceive. No matter to the collector. Sight was simply one of several sensory systems it could utilize to function. Its sensitive hair adaptation as well as its advanced auditory systems would be more than enough to navigate an environment devoid of light. Likely, the larger spiders inhabiting this zone functioned in much the same manner. The collector clicked its mandibles, wishing also to take a sample of their biomass, for it was directly superior to the jungle spider genes it currently utilized. It did not waste more time. It looked ahead at the ravine and calculated how much force it would require to leap across the gap. The collector stepped back a few meters, gaining a head start to build up velocity. Then, it charged once more, its staggering bulk bolting forwards in a black blur before it jumped off the very edge of the ravine. Wind sailed past its form as it contracted its muscles, making itself smoother and more aerodynamic like a living missile. With surprising grace, the collector landed right on the edge of the dark zone. It was pleased. Its calculations had not erred, proving that the heat within it was not affecting its mind to any compromising degree. The collector entered the dark zone of the forest, slipping into the leafy void of light as it recalled the path the goblins used to reach their camps unharmed by spiders. Estimated time of arrival to the first goblin camp, 1 hour. Estimated distance between the first and second camps, 1 hour. Estimated distance between the second and third camps, 20 minutes. Reinforcements, if there were any, would come slow between the first and second camps. The collector would find sizable challenge in raising the second and third camps, however, for the risk of reinforcements seemed far likelier. And, as the collector clicked its mandibles in anticipation, the third camp held this goblin lord. The collector trotted through the darkness, its sensitive hairs upright and alert to any vibration around it while its developed ears twitched back and forth, finding an optimal angle for receiving auditory signals. It breathed out in anticipation, its warm internal temperatures loosing out a cloud of vapor in this cold, lightless environment. Here, the collector would prove to these primitives, these tinkerers, that gathered so in such large groups, crowning one among them lord or emperor or president, that they were just as worthless and weak as the rest of them, that their titles were constructs granted to them by their societies, not by the infallible hand of evolution. The collector traveled the safe path through the dark zone for half an hour. It found that the route was safe because the goblins had placed down chunks of rock that glowed faintly in the presence of heat, shining quite bright when the high internal temperature of the collector neared them. Curious. The rocks seemed to emit a spectrum of light that escaped the absorbing properties of the trees around it. The collector had already consumed a sample of these trees, curious of whether its light absorption could be a useful adaptation in the future. These specimens were called deadwoods, and though they provided almost no biomass, their photoabsorbent qualities were indeed present as an anomalous mutation in their bark, allowing the collector to use it in the future. The collector picked up one of the rocks with a long, prehensile tongue, and it glowed a bright blue, sensing the warmth from the appendage. These were more noteworthy. The type of light that they emitted escaped the collector's identification, not matching the wavelengths of any light in its memory banks. At first, the collector had tried consuming the rocks, but found that they were completely inorganic. It was not some moss or microorganism within them that emitted this light. It was something inherent in the properties of the stone itself. A shame. The collector could have absorbed the rocks had it evolved an internal systems adaptation known as the autonomic neurobodily matrix, which would have granted it access to the metalloglottic ossifier, a modification to the throat and digestive system that would let it incorporate inorganic alloys into its carapace and body. The collector had skipped the adaptation at first because it did not provide immediate combat benefit, but now that it had enough tools of battle under its disposal to survive, it would focus on restoring its more utility-based adaptations, for to ensure maximum efficiency of its weapon systems, it had to build up a strong bodily foundation of internal and external systems adaptations. The collector broke off from the lit path at this point, knowing that the closer it neared the first encampment, the higher the chance there was of finding errant goblins that could escape and alert the rest. The collector stepped into the darkness, wishing to attempt circling around the first goblin encampment for an ambush attack. And of course, to also harvest the spider specimen. Chapter 15, Warrior. Leaving the stone-lit path, the collector found a marked difference in the atmosphere and environment. Its sensitive hairs quivered as they detected heavy motion on the forest floor. Several dozens of gigantified insect and arthropod specimen writhing about on the forest floor, fighting against each other in a tightly packed, many-legged battle royale of stingers, pincers, and mandibles. The collector waded through the writhing mess of fighting creatures below it, occasionally crushing an unlucky specimen under hoof. Nearly all of them, though massive compared to their counterparts in the light zone, were still tiny in front of the collector, and their instincts understood not to try and test their luck on a much larger, stronger being. Still, there were some, those among the largest of the specimen, that sought to test their mettle against the collector. A massive scorpion emerged from the ground in a burst of uncovered earth, lashing out against the collector with its barbed stinger. The stinger bounced off the collector's durable hyperalloy carapace, and the collector dispatched the scorpion with a quick thrust of its tusks, goring the creature from the head clean through its abdomen. The collector swiveled its head back, sliding the scorpion corpse into its mouth as its mandibles chopped down, breaking down the creature in moments. Not a moment later, and the collector felt strong vibrations mounting behind it. The incoming presence of a heavy, charging specimen. A beetle, it seemed, surging forwards with its crown like horns as sturdy and large as the swords the humans wielded. The collector swiveled around, pawed the forest floor once, and met the charge with one of its own. There was no contest. The beetle's horns broke apart, hitting the collector's carapaced face, and then the collector's half-ton mass of brutally quick and dense, armor-plated muscle blew apart the beetle in all directions, spilling a rain of crushed shell and gooey innards everywhere. The collector consumed the two challengers, respecting if a little their willingness to hunt that which was far beyond them. Biomass gained +10. Biomass level, 13/100. New genetic material available. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Minus new giant scorpion. Minus new stonecrusher beetle. The collector clicked its mandibles in mild disappointment. Only 10 points for two of what should have been among the largest of specimen here. As far as it could sense with its hairs and hearing, there were no other specimen crawling about on the dirt that remotely came close to the size and complexity of the creatures it had just consumed. Though their biomass was pitiful, at the least these specimen were sufficiently strong and large enough for the collector to adequately incorporate their genetic material into a potential metamorphosis without having to sacrifice its size and strength to morph any adaptations they could provide. Analysis of the beetle and scorpion specimen completed. Analysis of the spiders engaged. On the forest floor, the beetle and scorpion were creatures that might have reigned at the top, but what about above? The collector ignored the crawling chaos of insignificant, mindless lessers around it and instead focused on the treetops as it wandered further into the wilds of the dark zone. It did not take long for the collector to feel the presence of a spider. The trees in this dark zone were 3 to 4 times larger than those in the light zone, perhaps growing more thoroughly since they were absorbing light and nutrients at far more efficient rates. This granted the collector ample space to move around without crashing into anything, but the actual treetops were far less spacious in their orientation. The gigantified and numerous branches of the trees grew at a volume that outpaced what their trunks should support, and they compensated by intertwining together from tree to tree, weaving together to form what was essentially one enormous web. The gigantified spiders thus did not inhabit webs of silk, but instead a web carved out from the forest itself. Yet that did not necessitate a complete lack of silk production. The collector was quick to sense a thread of thick, rope-like silk dangling down from above, drooping down like a lure to the forest floor. If anything touched the thread, the vibrations would alert the spiders and cause them to drop down from above. Still, the spiders would pose no threat to the collector, for it had readily prepared itself for them and this environment. Its newly developed pyrocatalytic glands would make short work of anything native to this darkened environment. Theoretically, the collector understood that it could hunt the numerous gigantified spiders in the treetops and any larger insectoid specimen on the forest floor, and with enough time, it could accumulate enough biomass to reach the next metamorphosis level. The issue was that it could not easily find a place here to metamorphose. The forest floor was far too busy, far too competitive, crawling with hungry creatures. The collector would store genetic material samples for now and think about evolving later. Analysis of how it would conduct an extended hunt to accumulate enough biomass indicated a significant probability of drawing the attention of the goblins, not to mention that it would take up several hours. The goblins might already have begun in advance down to the human settlement by then. And yet, the collector would not pass up the opportunity to consume the genetic material of what was considered an apex predator in this environment, and it reached out with its head to tap the hanging thread of web with its tusk, taking care not to use the monomolecular tip to cut the strand. The collector wanted the spider manning this thread to sense vibrations and come down from its treetop hiding spot. As expected, a rustle of movement sounded high up, and the collector's sensitive hair stood on their ends as they felt rustling from large leaves, patter of several legs on wood, and the creak of branches moving under weight, the advance of the spider. The collector looked up, directly at where the spider would drop, and unleashed a small burst of fire. A controlled, minuscule burst emitted not to burn but instead to generate light to prevent the entire forest from burning down. But even that small blaze lit up the entirety of the collector's surroundings in blue-tinted, blinding bright white light. Though the light-absorbent dark woods hungrily dimmed the light within a moment, a mere second of exposure to that intense light was enough to generate intense movement across the forest floor. Every crawling creature in the vicinity of the flash halted their hunting and fighting and fled, digging underground or skittering away to thicker undergrowths. And in the midst of the clearing their retreat carved out, a giant spider writhed and rattled in pain, its 8 legs seized up, paralyzing it and putting it on its back. The collector ended the giant spider's life in an instant by stomping down right below its head, where its ganglia nerve center would be located. Its hoof crushed through the carapace with a crunch before punching through softer, fleshier meat with a squelch. From memories extracted through the goblins and the presence of the glowing stones, the collector accurately hypothesized that all the life forms in this forest had an intense aversion to light. This was the primary reason why the collector had evolved its pyrocatalytic glands, as in the unlikely advent that there were creatures here that could overwhelm the collector, likely through numbers, it could ward them off by simply generating light. The collector reached down and flicked the spider corpse in the air, its teeth unhinging its jaw wide with a crack and pop as it swallowed the creature down as a quick snack. Biomass gained +6. Biomass level, 19/100ths. New genetic material available. Stored genetic material. Black ant. Black goblin. Human. Giant scorpion. Stonecrusher beetle. Minus new jumping araca. The collector clicked its mandibles in understanding. The gigantified spider, the jumping araca as it was noted in this world, was indeed the apex predator in this biome. The araca could not produce too much webbing, but in exchange, the material was extremely durable, created in an efficiently chained weave that made it several times stronger than the webbing the collector currently had access to. The araca's limbs were also far more efficient and powerful than those of the jungle spiders that the collector utilized now, capable of building up great hydraulic pressure in their joints which could rapidly accelerate their movements in short bursts. In all ways, the jumping araca's genes would be an upgrade. The jumping araca were not the apex predators of this biome, however, simply on merit of their size and strength. Those traits, some of the larger insectoids on the forest floor could match, such as the stonecrusher beetle. No, it was the araca's social behavior that set them apart. The Araka observed some level of communal behavior, nesting together in a massive, interconnected community in the treetops, making them a small army of sorts. Their neural systems were also surprisingly complex, incapable of higher-order thinking but still possessing enough instinctual programming to employ basic tactics. At the least, it was probable that the Araka had developed some level of tribe mentality, meaning they would cooperate and gather to face larger threats such as the Collector. The Collector realized then that the jumping Araka would make any ambush against the goblins impossible. In the brief flash of light the Collector manifested with its fire, it had seen countless other web strands dangling down, spanning throughout the whole length of the forest. There was a veritable sea of Araka lying in wait above. It was only because the Collector had been so precise in executing this jumping Araka that none of the others were alerted. If the Collector wanted to stray from the stone-lit path, it would have to wade through countless jumping Araka ambushing it, and one stray movement might mean setting off a chain reaction of raining spiders. Though the Collector did not mind dealing with the Araka, knowing that they relied on powerful venom administered through jaws that could not breach the Collector's carapace, a mass swarm of them could potentially find a chink in the Collector's armor. For now, though the Collector was resistant to the vast majority of minor poisons, sufficiently strong ones could affect it, for it had yet to evolve the necessary internal system adaptation to grant it true immunity. Beyond the basic risk of bodily harm as well, the noise of the altercation would very likely alert the goblin encampment, especially if the Collector had to generate constant, intense light with its pyrocatalytic glands. Though the Darkwoods quickly snuffed out light, it was paradoxically this trait that made the presence of any light that much more noticeable. This meant that attempting to circumvent the path dotted with glowing stones would be difficult. The Collector calculated that its chances to create a successful ambush dwindled drastically. No, the Collector realized as it headed back to the lit path, it looked increasingly likely that it would have to attack the goblins head-on. It would have to face every single defense the goblins had erected, every single one of their fighters, their warriors, and their tricks without the cover of an ambush. So be it, then. The Collector bared its fangs as it stared ahead to the rest of the path, spittle dripping from its carapace-covered lips in anticipatory hunger. The Collector would not be hiding, waiting, stalking. All of those, it knew, utilizing when necessary for survival, but those traits were not what it was primarily bred for in the first place. The Collector's true form towered over the mightiest of dreadnought-class ships, casting shadows over planets visible from orbit. It was not like the infector strains that burrowed into worlds, birthing parasites and drones from seclusion. Nor was it a dominator strain that hid from afar, utilizing strong psionics to drive deep madness into tinkerers. The Collector did not hide at all, for though it was in tune with its primal instincts, it still was no mere animal. It was better than the countless, brutish fauna that comprised its genetic code. The sum of the many parts sourced over 1,000 worlds that built up the Collector did not produce yet another simple creature, another thing that hid in the dark and ate and lived and died solely for survival. It produced a warrior, and warriors lived for battle. The Collector clashed with the Tinkerers head-on without fear, without hesitation, without care to their numbers or their trinkets. It brought them devastation and destruction and misery not through the impersonal means of disease and parasites, but with its own claws, its own fangs, its own muscles. It brought them battle. It brought them war. For the past few days, the Collector had been weak, hiding, scurrying about on the dirt indistinguishable from the unevolved weakness at the bottom of this backwater planet's food chain, but no more. For the first time since it reached this world, the Collector came to realize with hunger burning in its being that it would not engage in a hunt. This would be a battle. This was what it was born for, what it lived for.